I'm more than happy. I'm more than happy to. Well, I'm sure there's several thousand Translink bus routes. I could stand here all day and read out the responses to them, but I'm not sure how much I test the patience of the speaker. So, but I'm more than happy to get the information the members requested and forward it on to them.
Normally myself does the rebuking, Mr. O'Dowd, but I'll allow you away with it this time because you were right. Sinead Ennis.
Question 2.
Sir.
I recognise the inconvenience caused by the temporary closure of one lane on both of the Shore Road Rostraver and the Keel Road Hilltown due to landslips caused by the unprecedented weather in November 2023. My department has appointed a specialist geotechnical engineer to assist in design solutions. However, the scale and complexity of the work required at both locations means that it will take time to deliver the permanent and cost-effective solutions. Regarding the A2 Shore Road, a temporary design solution has been developed to allow two-way traffic, and we are currently awaiting environmental approvals from NIA to allow the work to go ahead. Our contractor is ready to carry out the work as soon as approval comes through. The landslip on the Kilkeel Road in Hilltown is likely to require a complex solution, as the embankment to either side has become unstable, and therefore this will take additional time to be brought or to be thoroughly investigated. A design completed and then have this implemented. I can assure the member that my department will continue to prioritise this work to allow two-way traffic as soon as possible.
Ms Ennis.
I thank the Minister for that response, and I know that he does understand the level of disruption that this has caused, particularly on the A2 Shore Road. And just in respect to his answer, can the Minister give a guarantee that he is putting the necessary push, especially on the NIEA and the other departments that have responsibility here, to make sure that the A2 Shore Road is opened as soon as possible permanently to two-way traffic? Thank you.
Minister.
I can assure the member, and the member has raised this issue with me on a number of occasions, and I think we are going to organise a visit to that site at some stage in the future. But as I said, the initial landslide was quickly cleared, but there remained a risk from the embankment was unstable, and as a result, my temporary measures were installed by my department. The land within this area is of outstanding natural beauty, with several environmental designations that restricts the work that can be undertaken. My department, DERA, Forest Service and EA, the Environmental Agency officials, have had regular engagement to progress this matter. Engineers are now content that a temporary solution can be put in place to allow a full recovery of the road. My department is currently awaiting environmental approval to proceed with this work.
Mulholland, I want to hear what you have to say about Rostraver or Hilltown.
Well, I was going to say there's not that many landslides in Northern Ireland, so hopefully I won't be rebuked for talking about another landslide. But it was just, Minister, as you know, obviously I have an entire farming community cut off due to a landslide on the Glenchesque Road. We're now looking at nearly a year for that community, so I'm just wondering if there's any updates that the department can provide. Sorry to Rostraver and Kilkeel, as much as they are of interest to me. I'll maybe focus on the landslide in North Antrim.
Minister.
Since the Speaker didn't rebuke you, then I will not dare to. Yes, this is a significant landslide in the area the member refers to, and it's again another one that requires a significant engineering solution, if an engineering solution can be found to it, given the scale of the landslide there and the undermining of the roadworks in that area. So yes, my officials are continuing to work to see if we can identify a solution to that. But it does highlight, and both incidents came about as a result of torrential rainfall, and we have seen a significant change in our rainfall patterns and intensity of those rainfalls, and it's a reminder of the impacts of climate change are having on our society.
Robbie Butler.
Number 3, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
The proposed A1 Junctions Phase 2 scheme from Hillsborough to Lochbrickland has been developed to address the most prevalent safety measures on the 25 kilometres of the dual carriageway, particularly focusing on the closure of all gaps in the central median, including the installation of a concrete safety barrier, the provision of 4 grade separated junctions, the closure of 9 minor roads which connect with the A1, and the altering all remaining roads and accesses to operate on a left-in, left-out basis only. Preparation for the procurement process is now underway, involving the finalisation of the contract documents in readiness for a formal procurement competition. This process is due to commence next month and last between 12 to 15 months. Construction is planned to begin in February 2026 and continue to completion over the following 3 years.
Mr. Butler.
I thank the Minister for his answer, and I hope the Minister will forgive me. I just want to pay tribute to two people who died on the road. One was a former fire service colleague and one a friend that I grew up with, and I know the Minister is wedded to the delivery. So the Minister has outlined the time frame for the completion of the project. Can the Minister then outline what the cost implications will be and if there are any budgetary pressures? And can we get a commitment that it will be delivered on time regardless of budget?
Minister.
Well, I'm not sure I can say regardless of the budget, because there's a procurement exercise going on and we want to get best value for public purse. But the current cost estimates going forward for the scheme is around £110 million to £120 million. That will come out of my department's budget. I've already made a commitment to move ahead with this scheme, and that commitment remains.
John Buckley.
Minister's update in relation to the A1, which also travels through our own constituency in Upper Bann and has had huge implications in terms of life and safety along that route. The wider issue surrounding Hillsborough has been long in the press as to the severe traffic congestion that it itself faces, particularly as a rat run for many large heavy goods vehicles. I know the Minister's department has in past looked at this issue. Is there any further update that the Minister can provide to the House?
It has been raised with me on several occasions, and my department officials have carried out studies to see if there is a solution to Royal Hillsborough. We have not found that solution as yet that wouldn't cause significant traffic congestion and disruption on outlying roads. I am due to meet the member's party colleague, the Deputy First Minister, in the coming weeks, and we'll have further discussions about it.
David Honeyford.
To the Minister, thank you for outlining the sort of timeframes of what we're doing. It's a vital upgrade of the A1, and as others have said, the safety element here is paramount. But is there anything the department can do in the short term to improve safety on the road right now?
Minister.
We will constantly keep under review any measures we can take to improve road safety, particularly along the A1, given its horrific traffic accident history. But as I've said to members before, the most effective way of improving road safety is road user behaviour, and we have to ensure that when we're using our roads that we act in a way which keeps ourselves and others safe along that road.
Stephen Dunn. Minister.
I am pleased to confirm that the review of the part-time 20-mile-an-hour speed at schools initiative, which saw the facility introduced at 216 schools, is complete. I've had the opportunity to consider the review report, and I'm content. I do, however, want to share the report with the Infrastructure Committee before it is published, and have asked officials to make the necessary arrangements. I do wish to explore how we introduce 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in general, and have requested a paper from my officials in regards to this matter.
Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for the answer. And can the Minister reiterate his commitment to improving road safety within our schools, and also just to provide a wee bit more in terms of time frame on when you think you can move forward, and will you commit to increasing the amount of 20-mile-an-hour speed zones around our local schools?
Minister.
Thank the member for that question. As I say, I do want to see or have the committee been given the opportunity to review the report before I publish it. I expect that to happen in the next number of weeks. The report's findings have been positive, however, and it was good to see such feedback from teachers, pupils and parents in regards to the matter. It did raise a number of questions and perhaps even a number of challenges as to how you move forward to the introduction of it, but the detail I leave to another time.
Pat Sheehan.
Could the Minister tell us if he has plans to roll out the School Streets initiative?
Minister.
The School Streets initiative, for members who are maybe not familiar with the scheme, would mean that a designated street would be closed off to all traffic at a certain time of the day, obviously schools opening and closure times. We are looking at it in part of a broader aspect of work we're involved in, particularly in terms of active travel and how we promote more active travel, and schools would be a good example of how, where and when we could promote active travel. So it is part of that formula moving forward in terms of discussions and consultations around it.
Matthew Till.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just following on that exact same theme Mr. Sheehan has raised to the School Streets Initiative, my constituency in South Belfast is one where there are umpteen examples of schools that would really benefit from at least testing the school streets model, which isn't just about safety, it's also about air quality and, as you say, active travel. So could we have a specific timeline as to when the Minister expects to be able to update us as to whether it will be tested at least in pilot or rolled out further across the north?
Minister.
I hope to be able to launch our active delivery plan for consultation in November. Links to schools and other attractors are priorities within that plan. Work in this area also includes consideration of measures that can be used in the vicinity of schools, such as we have discussed, to improve the environment for parents and young people, walking, wheeling and cycling. Officials are taking forward a number of pilot projects at present that will inform future direction in this area.
Megan.
I was due to ask you a question about the school streets scheme, but I think if your answer's not so far, if you'll indulge me, I will say there's a school in my constituency where a child has been involved in a road traffic collision walking to school. With the next rollout,
it's question time, not time for statements. So if you're having a question, we'll move on. Alan Chambers.
Would the Minister agree with me that inconsiderate and careless parking outside schools can provide as big a threat to the road safety of our children as vehicle speed?
Minister.
Yes, and schools struggle with this every day. I'm a parent myself, and I know in terms of even going to my local primary school and some of the parking you see and behaviour you see, by a minority is totally unacceptable, and it does present a danger to the children who are leaving and entering that school. And I would appeal to everyone to be considerate how they park in and around our schools and to slow down when passing our schools.
Paul McGrath. Minister.
As Minister responsible for promoting and improving road safety, I want to work actively with partners to reduce deaths and serious injuries on our roads. I believe the targeted provision of infrastructure at local schools can go a long way to making our roads and communities safer. I am aware of the ongoing issues at Edward Street, Downpatrick, and in particular in the immediate vicinity of Our Ladies and St Patrick's Primary School. My department has taken forward a study to establish what options are available to introduce engineering measures to improve road safety and traffic progression along Edward Street in Downpatrick. Due to the recent opening of a new Eurospar and the merging of 3 schools to form the Keele Trinity Grammar School, we have now commissioned further traffic studies for inclusion, or further traffic surveys for inclusion in this study to inform other options. My officials will arrange another meeting with DEA representatives, including the MLAs, after we receive the conclusions of the study to discuss a way forward.
Mr McGrath.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. During the collapse of these institutions, I had asked the Department for a resolution to the issues. From the Minister has come back. I have asked him, I have written to him, I have spoken to him, and each and every time we're told that something is happening at some point in the future. What message would the Minister have to the primary school child who on the 18th of September was pinned up against the railings in fear as a vehicle had to mount the footpath in order to be able to maintain the traffic flow in the street?
Minister.
My message would be this: the driver of the vehicle should have been taking all precautions to protect the pedestrians on the footpath. There is no I have to mount the footpath. There is you drive at a speed which is appropriate to the area and you respect other road users. So in the member's question, he is targeting or pointing his question in the wrong direction. It's like Mr. Chambers' question. You're driving past a primary school or any school. You drive appropriately to ensure that you're not presenting a danger to other road users.
Cathy Mason.
Minister for his answers, and I do welcome that there are now further studies with the changes that have happened in the area. You did mention about consulting with local representatives. Can I ask how and when that will happen?
Minister.
Yes, when we have firm proposals to bring forward, and I understand the frustration of elected representatives in this regard, and even members of the public in this regard. But when you are going to change traffic going through a town or a village, it has implications for the roads and networks in and around that. So we have to rule out taking actions which may have damaging actions elsewhere in that road network. We want to make sure that when we take an action, it is the right action. But once we are in a position to ensure that we have a proposal, a workable proposal to bring forward, we will bring it forward in consultation with local councillors and MLAs and the MPs for the area.
Thank the Minister for his responses so far. Can I ask the Minister for an assessment on how the active travel delivery plan, which he's already mentioned, will better support active travel on the way to school?
Schools obviously are a rich source of promoting active travel if we can provide the proper infrastructure and safe environment for students or for pupils and parents to walk to and from school. So they will be a central part of it. As I said, I hope to launch that consultation in November, and there will be much discussion as to how we ensure, particularly in terms of if we can get our young people and encourage them to start walking to and from schools, then you're setting a pattern in life which will hopefully stay with them for the remainder of their life. So it will be a central part of our active travel strategy.
Dan Dodds.
Storm overflows are a critical part of any wastewater system, and during periods of heavy rainfall are designed to allow diluted sewage to spill into water bodies in accordance with regulations set out by NEA. Spills from storm overflows are made up of wastewater from households and businesses that is heavily diluted by rainwater. The vast majority of what is spilled is made up of rainwater. However, NI Water estimates that approximately 1 to 2% of what is spilled is raw sewage. NI Water publishes information on both predicted and actual spill volumes on its website. From information provided by NI Water on predicted spills into Belfast Lough, this equates to 1 to 2% approximately, and therefore is around 28,000 cubic metres per year.
Dan Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Minister, the NI Water estimate that there is around 20 million tonnes of untreated sewage spilled into our waterways annually. And that includes around 10,000 septic tanks that are on the inner boundary of Lough Neagh. Would the Minister agree with me that the issues around Lough Neagh are not just an issue for the farming community, who are easy to blame in this issue, but a wider issue that must be tackled in the round and a multifaceted issue? And will he commit to funding the devices that are necessary to allow us to ascertain just how much raw sewage is in our waterways?
Minister.
Thank you. Thank the member. I agree it is a multifaceted issue in relation to Lough Neagh, and finger pointing and blaming isn't going to get us anywhere. What we have to do is identify the issues and find resolutions to those issues. In regards to my responsibilities and my responsibility as the sponsoring department for NI Water, I am working with my executive colleagues and others about ensuring that we have the proper funding for NI Water to put in place the wastewater treatment works, also to put in place the spillage monitors, so we know exactly what's happening and where it's occurring, and to work with others to ensure that we restore Lough Neagh to its full health and well-being.
Ask on the back of that why storm overflows can't be removed, or what would the implications be?
Minister.
To remove storm overflows completely would cost billions upon billions of pounds, and maybe not be the best, most effective usage of public monies in that context. There is no question we have to upgrade and install new wastewater treatment works. But the most efficient wastewater treatment works will always have an overflow built into them, because when a deluge of a storm comes, the system becomes overpowered and you have to release the water somewhere. If you don't release the water, then it goes back up the system into schools and homes and properties. As I said in my original answer, while the volumes of water being released are quite significant, it usually contains between 1 and 2% of raw sewage, which is not ideal. I'm not suggesting it's ideal, but it's 1 to 2% of raw sewage being released into water courses, which themselves are being also heavily influenced by the storm, so they're going into being further diluted. But every system, no matter how modern, how well invested in it, will have an overspill facility built into it.
Peter McDonald's.
Thank you, Minister. To improve our water quality, Northern Ireland Water will have to maintain its wastewater treatment sites to an acceptable and high standard. And to do this, it will need to be able to spend above its RDEL and CDEL allocations. Has the Minister explored how they may be able to do this?
I have. It's a constant course of engagement I have on discussion. I'm currently, as I've said, to answer one of the previous questions, I'm engaging with my executive colleagues to see if we can have more financial capability in this financial year. I'm looking at legislation in terms of the SUDS bill, sustainable drainage, where we're trying to hold back some of the rainwater going into the system and let it release into the system slower, which means that it doesn't become overpowered as quickly as it can in some circumstances. I'm also looking at in terms of developer contributions. That may require legislative change, and I'm exploring that to see if that's part of the suite of solutions we require in relation to a sustainable funding model for NI Water moving forward.
Dr. Reagan.
I thank the Minister for his remarks so far. Minister, in a previous question you alluded to the extreme weather events which seem to be happening now with monotonous regularity. Could the Minister say, is there any plans to improve the modelling that we're doing with the Met Office about these extreme weather events, particularly as the implications that they have for overpowering our sewage system and other areas of our infrastructure?
Well, in terms of the spillage monitors, which Ms Dodds referred to earlier on, that will give us evidential basis of where the current areas are under the most pressure in terms of overflows and spillages. I also hope to be able to invest in a storm forecast or a floods forecasting centre for here, which I think would be hugely beneficial. It is quite a significant investment, but I think in terms of our forward planning work programme, it's something that we are going to have to invest in to ensure that we have a suite of knowledge in front of us which allows us to plan, predict and react in a way which protects homes and businesses moving forward.
Ms. Kimmins.
Question number 7, please.
The review of the South East flooding contains 22 recommendations, and these cover a range of measures including the provision of flood forecasting, the development of additional flood risk management infrastructure and further improving communications and resilience. My department is currently progressing a study to assess the viability of further flood alleviation measures to reduce flood risk in Newry. The project team are also currently engaging with Newry, Mourne and Down Council with a view to potentially accelerating a section of the proposed flood alleviation works through the Council's theatre and conference facility suite. My department is also continuing to work closely with Newry business community to establish a regional community resilience group for them and others to improve preparedness for any future flooding. To alleviate the impacts of floods from rivers, my department will also continue its inspection and maintenance regime in relation to designated watercourses and their associated infrastructure within the Newry and South Armagh catchments. An extensive programme of desilting works is also scheduled to be delivered this financial year in Newry for designated underground culvert infrastructure.
Ms. Kimmins.
Thank the Minister for his answer so far, particularly as we come towards the first anniversary of the flooding last year, which decimated particularly Newry City and parts of South Armagh. With that said, can the Minister give me some more information then on the Regional Community Resilience Group, please?
Thank you. The Regional Resilience Group has been set up in discussions with other agencies to see how we can work with other agencies and communities to assist communities in their response to flooding and how they can assist when flooding incidents happen, particularly in the distribution of sandbags, etc., and storing sandbags in certain localities so they're easily accessible because, as the member knows and everyone knows, we don't always get significant warning as to when a flooding event is going to take place, or it's very difficult to predict where the exact major flooding incident is going to take place. So working with local communities and local businesses, we want to be in a position to ensure that there's accessibility to some of the materials that we require for that first initial emergency response, working in conjunction with all the partners who respond to flooding incidents.
Justin McNulty.
Minister, as a result of flood events and flood risk and inadequate mitigation measures, households and businesses in Newry, Armagh and South Armagh are being crippled by the cost of extortionate insurance premiums. What specific actions a bar cutting down ancient Irish oak trees does your department propose to take to address flood risk factors in a manner that will ease the burden of crippling insurance costs for my constituents?
The reality is, and the member throws a flippant remark, and if I had followed the member's advice and not carried out the necessary repairs or works in Newry, the flooding in Newry last year would have been worse than it was if I had followed your advice on your campaign to do nothing, because you didn't come forward with an alternative solution. You think you can run a government department through headlines?
Yes, through the
you
chair,
can't.
Mr. Minister.
You have to be able to run a government department through evidence-based interventions. My department had an evidence-based intervention for Newry. We carried it out, and as a result of carrying it out, we protected thousands of homes and thousands of businesses in Newry. Now, does more need to be done? Of course it needs to be done. And some of those decisions will be difficult. Some of them will be unpalatable. Some of them will require a minister to make an evidence-based intervention. And I will continue to do that.
Philip Rep. Minister.
Major road schemes are an important part of the work that is delivered by my department as we seek to reduce journey times, increase reliability and improve road safety. In October 2022, I published a Placemaker and Active Travel Review report on the scheme and asked my officials to carry out further work on 3 scenarios recommended within it. The work to prepare a placemaking and active travel development report has now been completed. Due to the underinvestment in major road schemes and the constrained budget position, the scheme was considered as part of the prioritisation of major schemes, and further work on the scheme was paused as part of the outworkings of that review. I plan to meet with officials in the coming weeks to review the scheme, which will allow me to consider the way forward for the entirety both of the major roadworks development and the placemaking scheme. Any subsequent decisions to proceed with the York Street interchange project can only be made when I am confident there is budget certainty for the scheme and its delivery in line with my department's emerging transport plans.
Mr. Rep.
Speaker, and the Minister will be aware of the traffic chaos that took place in our city centre at the weekend and the need for major roadworks to take place. But given the budget constraints he's outlined, will his department then commit to delivering smaller scale projects such as the pedestrianisation of Hill Street in my constituency, which has also been paused, which would have little financial requirement for his department but would have a big impact in our capital city?
Minister, very briefly, please.
The traffic chaos you referred to at the weekend is as a result of a £3.2 million road improvement scheme being carried out in Belfast. I suspect people in rural Fermanagh and rural Tyrone and elsewhere are going aghast that people are complaining that they're getting £2.2 million spent in their area.
Move to topical questions. I call Mark Durgan.
Mr. Speaker, could the Minister outline what action he is taking to improve the electric vehicle charging network?
The electric vehicle charging network is a commercial operation being driven by commercial entities, which has seen significant success in recent times, and we are seeing more and more electric vehicle charging points being made available to members of the public on that commercial basis.
Durgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems that this is another one of these ones. It's a commercial operation until there's something positive to announce, but when there isn't, it's back to being a commercial one. Given that the Minister's stated commitment to electric vehicle improvements, could he explain why 25 months after he announced £1.3 million funding from the Office for Zero Emissions Vehicles for on-street residential charge point schemes, the tender for this project has not yet been released?
Minister.
I don't have the full details of the scheme in front of me. It's perhaps the scheme the member is referring to in terms of working in conjunction with local councils. Sorry, I just can't catch the member's eye. Working in conjunction with local councils moving forward. I'm more than happy to follow it up for the member, but as I say, this is going to be a commercially driven operation moving forward. The Department of Infrastructure, for instance, doesn't provide access to petrol stations or diesel stations. That's not part of our function or moving forward is our role. It would be nice if you had the financial backing to be able to nationalise the electric vehicle charging network. I could be very tempted to go down that road. I simply don't have the financial wherewithal to do it at this time.
Jonathan Buckley.
And I know the Minister's in fine form today, So on that point, I don't know if he listens to Cool FM, but if he did this morning, he would have heard the pleas regarding traffic congestion in Belfast city centre. And it's not just road works, but serious issues pertaining to congestion. So can I ask the Minister to explain in detail what his department's plans are to alleviate the serious congestion concerns, not just in Belfast, but across Northern Ireland?
There are serious, I agree with the member, there are serious traffic congestion in Belfast in the mornings and during the evening rush hour. Part of it is as a result of a £340 million investment in a new Grand Central Station, and part of it is a result of the £3.2 million that is being spent on upgrading the Sydenham bypass. So the reason why some of it is happening is because we are making investment in our infrastructure for the economic well-being of us all. I have asked my officials to monitor the Belfast situation closely to see if there is interim measures we can take while the work in and around Grand Belfast Central Station is going ahead, to see if there's changes to lighting operations or street lighting operations that we can take which would help alleviate the traffic in and around that. I accept that there's always circumstances where public transport is not suitable, but when you're sitting in traffic, perhaps one question we need to ask ourselves is this: could we use public transport to get here? Because when you're sitting in traffic, you are the traffic. But I do accept there's circumstances where it's not always accessible or available for everyone.
Mr. Buckley.
Speaker, tourism is important to our city, and for buses to be able to access hotels and to bring tourists into the city, it's important that DFI is working in conjunction with those businesses. So with that in mind, I've been informed today that DFI have put a ban on private bus companies allowing their passengers to get off at the Europa Hotel, making visitors cart their bags throughout the city centre. So can the Minister commit to looking at how this regulation is impacting upon the tourists coming to our city, and bearing in mind that the Europa Hotel, as the most bombed city in Europe, not only survived but is now thriving? Let's not let it die from DFI over-regulation.
Minister.
I don't know the members DFI has banned, but there has to be appropriate parking for coaches in Belfast City Centre. That's without doubt. And my officials and others are working along with Belfast City Council to see how we best identify and regulate parking for Belfast City Centre and coaches. If we just have unregulated coach parking, then the traffic congestion the member refers to will only get worse. So let's work our way towards a solution, and I have no doubt we'll be able to reach a solution on it.
I call Linda Dillon.
Thank the Minister. Minister, can you confirm where there is a request for a speed limit to be reduced from 40 mph to 30 mph? Is there a requirement for a recommendation from PSNI on that reduced speed limit?
Minister.
There will be consultation with the PSA in that regard, particularly in terms of their history of collisions or in that stretch of road where the request for 30 mph or the reduction in the speed limit or increase in the speed limit, whichever it may be, is being requested.
Dillon.
Thank you, Minister, for the answer. And can you outline any work that's being undertaken by your department at the moment to look at policies regarding speed management measures, particularly in built-up areas?
Minister.
I had mentioned earlier in question time that as part of the 20 mph review of speed limits in and around some of our schools, that the question has arose, would it be appropriate to introduce 20 mph zones in certain areas, particularly residential areas? And I think that's a question we need to explore further. I am aware of the clamour around the reduction of 20 mph speed limits in Wales. That was a much more general approach than I would be proposing. I would be proposing that we look at particularly residential areas without through roads on them, and to see if a reduction of 20 mph would increase road safety for both whoever happens to be using the road. But I think it's something we do need to explore further.
David Brooks.
The Minister for his answers so far. He will know that my constituency East Belfast was particularly impacted by the traffic chaos that we've seen at the weekend, largely due to, I think, poor traffic management around the area. Could I ask the Minister to undertake to talk to relevant colleagues to ensure that there's a review of what happened at the weekend to ensure it doesn't happen again?
Minister.
I'm looking at your rural colleagues as they looking on envy upon Belfast receiving its £3.2 million roads improvement, its £340 million bus and rail station. Your rural colleagues are going, what are you complaining about? But I do accept there has been traffic congestion in Belfast city centre. We are reviewing it, and if lessons need to be learned from the weekend, will be learned as we're moving forward. But we are resurfacing a major artery into Belfast. That's the reason we're resurfacing it, because it is such a high-volume road network. And I suspect most of the members in this chamber travel it on a daily basis. It needs upgraded, it needs resurfaced, and that's why we're doing it. But yes, if lessons can be learned, they will be.
Brooks.
I thank the Minister for his answer, and I was just about to say my rural colleagues will benefit more probably than the residents of Sydenham, who felt that they were locked into the residential streets at the weekend. So yes, just impressed with them. There were events taking place in the wider area that involved road closures and so on at the weekend, and I would just ask that perhaps those things would be taken into account in future, and perhaps looked at doing more of the work in the evenings. Thank you, Minister.
Minister.
Well, yes, and we do try to coordinate as much as we can, but we're scheduling a major work scheme, both in terms of the opportunity to do it with our contractors, who have been involved in a number of other major road schemes. We want to do it when the weather's reasonably good, so we have the timing on it sometime. And the work at I think this week's work was carried out between 10 and 6 a.m. in the morning, or 10 in the evening and 6 a.m. in the morning. And there'll be further works in the weeks and months ahead, but we will look, and as I say, if lessons need to be learned, they'll be learned. There will be inconvenience. We cannot completely plan out inconvenience. There is going to be inconvenience as a result of this scheme and other schemes, but I hope and have no doubt suspect that when the schemes are complete, people will welcome the fact that the work has been done.
Liz Kimmins.
The Minister for his assessment of the success of the part-time 20-mile-per-hour zones outside schools.
Minister.
As I said to one of your colleagues earlier, I am going to allow the committee to see the full report before I make detailed comment on it. But it is welcome I welcome the fact that the contribution from teachers, pupils, and parents in their feedback about the report, it clearly has had benefits, and we as a result of the consultation and the work that has been done, we understand those benefits much further, but I think it's only right and proper the committee's given its place.
Kimmins.
I thank the Minister for his answer, and I know certainly across my area where they're in place there has been benefits. Could I ask then if in any future tranches of the rollout of the 20-mile-per-hour part-time zones, would the department consider Killian Primary School in my constituency as part of that? We have been lobbying for some time. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, and I'm aware of the members' lobby in regards to that school, and yes, it will be taken under consideration in any future launch of the scheme to include more schools across the north.
Andy Allen.
I asked the Minister for the status of the Departmental Taxi Advisory Forum.
I don't have the details in that regard in front of me. I have recently met the taxi industry. It was a couple of weeks ago where I had discussions with them, and in true taxi style, it was quite frank and straight talking, which it was okay. But I've had discussions at ministerial level with them in recent weeks.
Mr. Allen.
The Minister will no doubt be aware that many within the disabled community, myself included, face challenges with being able to access accessible transport, and indeed it's been covered in the media recently, the broad range and scope of that. Can the Minister advise what work his department's undertaken to increase the availability and the options of accessible transport here in Northern Ireland?
Minister.
Yes, I can assure the member now, taxis is a step aside from my department. I have a certain responsibility in relation to licensing and regulation and other matters, but I don't control the industry as closely as I would control Translink in that regard. But yes, in discussions with the taxi industry and others, I will be ensuring, as far as my powers allow, that there is full accessibility for people with disabilities in our public transport system in particular. The treatment you received recently at Birmingham Airport, I believe it was totally unacceptable. And fair play to you for highlighting the needs and bringing that once again to the forefront of discussions around the rights of the disabled people and their right to access public transport fully. We have made huge strides forward in recent years in relation to public transport, and I intend to continue that. But the taxi industry is one step aside, but I will continue to engage with them and see what support we can offer them as well, because it's a challenge for their industry as well, both financially and otherwise, because So I understand the challenges they face, and I'll work with them in any way I can.
Question 8 has been withdrawn. I call Stephen Dunn.
For his assessment of the impact of the introduction of one-year temporary exemption certificates on our MOT waiting times.
Minister.
I referred to this in the committee last week when I was in for questioning to the committee. If the significant reduction in correspondence to my office in relation to MOTs is a measure, then there has been some success in that regard. I think we will understand the full implications of it and the success or otherwise of it by spring of next year, which was our target, to reduce waiting times to around 6 weeks by spring of next year. But thus far, the various indications are that we are seeing improvement across the board.
Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, and thank the Minister for that. I do appreciate progress has been made. Certainly my own local centre in Newton Ards is still over 2 months, which is, appreciate, still is over your target time. Just in relation to that, any update on the Hyde Bank MOT Centre, which was due to be opened over 2 years ago?
Minister.
The reopening of Hyde Bank is still causing us huge frustrations and challenges. I hope to have further announcements or engagements around that in the coming weeks, because we do have to bring that matter to a conclusion one way or the other.
Tennyson.
Minister, may I ask if you've had any engagement with ABC Council regarding the proposed changes to traffic flow at Rough Ryland Street and Scarva Street in Banbridge?
Minister.
I haven't had direct engagement as Minister with them, but my officials from the section office will have had engagement with the Council in that regard.
Mr. Hanson.
Thank you, Minister. Given the significant public concern at the potential for those changes to cause traffic chaos, could I ask that you engage and commit to engage with the Council urgently and before those changes take place?
Minister.
I'm happy to write to the Council and establish their views on this matter. I am aware of the issue as a local resident of the borough, but as I say, I have no direct engagement, but we will follow it up with the Council.
We move to questions to the Minister for Justice. Congratulations, Mr. Dowden, getting through all of your topicals. Move to questions for Minister for Justice. That's something for that Minister to follow. But we have questions 2, 3 and 8 are withdrawn. Questions 6 and 10 are grouped. Call Maurice Bradley.
Question 1.
Minister.
The prison service requires resources it needs to help people who live and work in prison safe and secure, and to support the rehabilitation and resettlement back into the community of people in their care. Earlier this year, the prison service reviewed its operational staffing levels due to the significant and sustained increase in prisoner population. In keeping with the findings of that review, I agreed to an increase in the prison service's staffing complement of 75 prison officers. The prison service is currently working with NI Civil Service HR partners to confirm recruitment arrangements for a custody prison officer campaign that will launch in October.
Mr. Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. But can I ask the Minister, in view of the circumstances that abound in England because of overcrowding, where prisoners are being let out early, does she envisage anything like that in Northern Ireland?
Minister.
Well, I've learned in this job never to say never, but at the moment we're not in that situation. We currently have adequate capacity in our prisons for prisoners to be able to serve the entirety of their sentence. We also have adequate staff, so we're not in an overcrowded situation. However, I'm conscious, and it's one of the reasons why we're going out to recruitment, that those numbers are significantly higher than was anticipated with the current complement of prison officers. And in order to keep people safe and ensure that the regime is able to operate effectively, it is important that we have the prison properly staffed, and I think that the new custody prison officer recruitment will go a long way to help that.
Dr. Reagan.
Minister for a reply so far. The Minister will be aware of the morale problems within the prison service at the moment, and indeed one of the things that may be affecting the recruitment process is the fact that many prison officers feel as if they haven't been listened to, particularly in issues to do with NICS HR and what it's been doing to. Would the Minister commit to an independent review to look at this process within the Northern Ireland Civil Service HR process to make sure our prison officers are not badly treated as they believe they are?
Minister.
Review of NIC, Northern Ireland Civil Service HR, would be a matter for the Department of Finance, not the Department of Justice. However, I have done work to try to add support for prison officers. So, for example, both serving and former officers now have the opportunity to avail of the Police Rehabilitation and Resettlement Trust. and their facilities. We have also put in Prisons Well as a system and have provided wellbeing hubs at the prisons. So there is considerable work going on to support prison officers in what is an increasingly complex job. We also have, I have to say, already discussed issues with respect to the HR issues around prison officers and the fact that many prison officers feel that their jobs are distinct and different from many of the others in the civil service. It is, however, sad that at times when people get up in the chamber, they don't acknowledge that when they're talking about levels of absenteeism and injury and sickness, and make, I think, rather spurious claims about the high levels of absenteeism without recognising that actually our absenteeism in DOJ reflects the number of people who are deployed within prison service.
Neil McAllister.
Question number 4.
Minister.
All types of violence are linked, and we know that there is still much to do to support women who face paramilitary harm. It is completely and unequivocally unacceptable. At ministerial and official level, we are in close and regular contact with those delivering the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, the Domestic and Sexual Abuse strategy, and it is essential to see these as complementary efforts that work together to support those who continue to face harm, but also ensure that we prevent this happening in the first place.
McAllister.
I thank the Minister for her answers so far. The Minister will be aware of the recently published report by Dr Aisling Swain that highlighted the prevalence of violence against women and girls by paramilitaries. Would you be able to provide your assessment of that publication?
Minister.
Well, first of all, I want to commend both Dr Swain and also Foyle Women's Aid for the important research that was produced on the topic of paramilitary-related gendered coercive control. I was very pleased to be at the launch of that report to signal my very clear support for the work that's being done on this. The research, I think, is a very timely and important piece of research which provides real insight into the lived experience of women who have faced paramilitary-related gendered coercive control, and the report and the testimonies of the victim survivors makes for harrowing and sobering reading. These women have faced horrendous physical and sexual harm, including threats, surveillance, displacement, and within relationships where they should have felt safe. The violence against women and girls and paramilitary violence are also linked, and the new End Violence Against Women and Girls strategy and strategic framework and draft programme for government also published this month speak to the importance of addressing these issues. We recognise that violence does not happen in a vacuum, Mr Speaker, and violence against women and girls and ongoing paramilitary violence are linked. We now need to take this real opportunity to ensure that there is a comprehensive and joined-up response.
Joanne Bunting.
Mr Speaker, the Department made a transformation bid with regard to the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls, and unfortunately that did not move to the next stage. Can I ask the Minister what her plans are for the next steps since that bid was unsuccessful?
Minister.
Well, the bid was from the Department in terms of the justice elements of that and also TEO, so it was a cross-departmental bid. We will still have to deliver on the End in Violence Against Women and Girls framework, and obviously there are significant parts of that which will fall to my department. However, I think the most important parts of that are now around early intervention. We have made many changes following the Gillen review in terms of how the justice system responds to violence against women and girls. There is still much work to be done in that space, and I hope to address some of that in a victims bill later in this mandate. But in terms of the work that's being done jointly between our departments, we will continue to do that because it's important that we are not competing for the same resources when we're doing the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls and the Domestic and Sexual Abuse strategy. From my perspective, the two are distinct, and whilst there are synergies in them, we also need to recognise that myself and the Minister for Health on leading in the Domestic and Sexual Violence and Abuse strategy are also considering all victims, not only women and girls, so we are also considering male victims of those issues, but there are synergies and we want to make the most of those.
And I think you've answered my question, I think, already in the most part, but we have the DOJ's Tackling Paramilitary Criminality and Organised Crime programme, we have the TEO's Ending Violence Against Women and Girls framework, and we have the PSNI's Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls, which has been running for 2 years now. Does the Minister think it is time now to have a single strategic lead in regards to this so that we aren't duplicating resource?
Mr.
Well, I think that first of all, in terms of the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, I actually proposed that it would be the Executive Office that would take it forward, because this isn't just a matter for justice or for policing, it is a matter for the whole executive. Every department has a role to play, whether that be health, whether it be education, whether it be the economy or communities. We all have a role to play in terms of ending violence against women and girls, which is much wider than domestic and sexual violence and abuse, where health and justice take the lead. So I think it is important also that every strand and every department also have their own internal strategies to deal with these issues. But it's important that that isn't about duplication, it is about learning from best practice. One of the strong things about the Tackling Paramilitarism programme is that we have found out what works in terms of harm reduction in the context of paramilitary violence. And I think there is an opportunity to then apply that in other areas where we want to reduce harm.
Owen Tennyson.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
My department is currently facing stabilisation pressures of £48 million. This projected potential overspend was reported to the Department of Finance as part of the recent in-year exercise. In addition, the department is also facing exceptional pressures of £227 million in relation to legal claims for McLeod injury to feelings, data breach and holiday pay. These costs are not affordable within my department's budget under any circumstance. Whilst my department has been proactive in taking actions over the last few years to ensure we live within budget, we are now at the point where all options have been exhausted. Given the severity of the financial position and the demand-led nature of justice expenditure, there is no scope for my department to absorb the remaining level of pressures.
Mr. Tennyson.
I thank the Minister for her answer. Minister, could I ask for your assessment of how the relative needs of your department and the PSNI have been accounted for in the proposed needs-based factor from the UK Government?
Well, I would have to say not very well would be the best way to describe it. In terms of measuring need, what they did was look at the allocation that was made to the department in 2017-18. By then, the ring fencing of the department's finances that had existed from 2010 to 2014 had been removed, and there had been, I suppose, a bit of a raid on the department's finances. So rather than reflecting what we needed to run the department and to provide the services that we're required to provide, it instead reflected what we actually had to do that and the envelope within which we were working. I think it's important to recognise that there are certain elements of policing and justice here that, by their very nature, by our geographical location and without any reference to special circumstances, do require a higher level of investment. One example is the cost of mutual aid in comparison to other forces across the UK, where we can't provide that as cheaply. So that's one of the reasons why we need to look at those, and it's an area that I know the Department of Finance and my officials are working very hard to raise with Treasury in terms of ensuring that we are properly reflected based on evidence around the higher needs-based factor, which I believe Northern Ireland should achieve.
Mr. McNulty.
Would the Minister agree that continued underfunding of police will continue to erode faith in the justice system to the detriment of victims, and would the Minister agree that the police constables should take every measure possible in order to secure adequate funding to keep people and communities safe?
Minister.
I think it's important that we all take every possible opportunity to ensure that policing and justice is properly funded. I have the dual duty of ensuring that policing is properly funded, but also ensuring the remainder of the justice system is properly funded. There is no point funding one at the expense of the other. That will not enhance victim confidence. It will not enhance the confidence in the community. If people are arrested and then have to sit for 5, 6, 7 years before they get to court, that will not help victims. So it's important that when I get resources into the Department of Justice, that we properly allocate it in a balanced way to ensure that the entire system is able to function. At the moment, we don't have the resources to be able to do that across the board.
Mr. McHugh.
John Corda, number 6.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I want to answer questions 6 and 10 together. The Northern Ireland Prison Service prioritises rehabilitation by supporting and challenging those in its care to change and address their offending behaviour. This includes providing opportunities through a wide and progressive curriculum for individuals to develop skills and attain qualifications that will give them the best chance to secure and sustain employment on release. Prison Service offers a varied curriculum of accredited training from entry level 3 to level 3 in education, vocational and employability skills, in addition to further education opportunities, which have been designed to meet the diverse needs of the prison population. The curriculum is kept under continuous review to respond to the changing needs of the prison population, emerging industries within the labour market and labour market shortages, including current and future skills gaps. The provision of learning and skills is outsourced to our professional delivery partner in Belfast Met, who recently completed a substantive curriculum review, which included the education provision at McGilligan. The recommendations from this review will be used to inform the strategic direction of learning and skills provision over the next 5 to 10 years and respond to the challenges presented by a rising prison population.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer to this point. And can you provide for us an assessment of the current provision of courses available in prison for offenders?
Minister.
Well, as I've said, there are a wide range of curriculum offered, from essential skills such as numeracy and literacy, vocational skills ranging from barbering to bricklaying, and employability skills, including soft skills, writing CVs and interviewing techniques. But we're also trying to enhance constantly the learning experience in line with what's offered in the community and support future-proofing of that learning, so that we can develop the use, for example, of digital technology with all the challenges that presents within a prison system. Plans are at a very early stage, with a pilot due to commence shortly in Maghaberry to test the viability of virtual delivery across the prison estate, which may also enhance opportunities. It has the potential to maximise class numbers and also expand the learning and skills curriculum. But most learners prefer a blended approach, so they do like the human touch, and it's important that we get that balance right in terms of access, but also in terms of support.
And thank you to the Minister for her answers thus far. I suppose I'd like to ask the Minister if she could indicate if her department has any plans to introduce specific rehabilitation courses for offenders that have been jailed in relation to a domestic violence offence.
We do have specific programmes that are there in terms of working with people who have offended, and they are tailored to their offending behaviour. Probation Service provides some of those schemes, and there are ones for perpetrators of domestic violence and abuse. One of the challenges that we face in the prison system at the minute is that many of the people who are within the prison system are there on remand, and therefore tend not to want to engage in programmes that are about challenging their offended behaviour, because most of them are still trying to maintain a position that they're not guilty ahead of their trial. And that makes it very difficult. So while we can offer general education to those prisoners, and many will avail of that, they will often avoid the kind of perpetrator and behaviour change programmes that I think are absolutely critical to rehabilitation successfully, and particularly in the space of violence against women and girls and domestic abuse.
Stuart Dixon.
Thank you, Minister, for your answers so far. Minister, can I particularly welcome the review of education services by Belfast Met? Can you assure the House that that will not only future-proof those courses, but will also look at how we broaden out the type of education service that can be provided to prisoners?
Yes, I think it's very important that we do that. We are obviously committed both to ensuring that when people leave the prisons that they are rehabilitated in the truest sense, in that their attitudes and their offending behaviour have been successfully challenged and changed, but also that they have skills to be able to seek employment post-release. And we're working now on a series of skills academies where we are able to train people up for particular areas where we know there are job shortages, and where prisoners may benefit from the additional skills training that we can provide within the prison system. We also need to work, though, with people in the community, and one of the things that I've been doing since returning to office has been engaging with the business community and talking to them, first of all, about the opportunities that exist within prisons to train people up for specific lines of work. Secondly, to talk to them about the positives that come from employing people who have an offending background, because many of them are very grateful for the opportunity to get a job and very keen to make a contribution. And thirdly, we can then test with them what the key areas are where there are new opportunities that we can then adapt our training. We need to be agile to ensure that whatever we produce in terms of the prison system, that we are producing skills that are actually of value in the workplace.
Question 7.
Minister.
Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service has provided £100,000 of additional resourcing to the Planning Appeals Commission each year since 2021. NIC's officials continue to meet with the PAC Chief Commissioner to consider any resourcing pressures, including vacant posts. At present, there is only one vacant post in the Commission, which is due to be filled in January 2025. The Northern Ireland Audit Office has recently initiated a strategic review of the PAC. This will consider the overall role and function of the Commission, the challenges it currently faces, and options available to improve performance and wider planning outcomes in Northern Ireland.
Mr Dunn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank the Minister for the answer. And it is widely recognised that the performance of the PAC is not where it needs to be, and I think everybody would concur with that. What more can be done to improve its efficiency? And also just an update on that review from the Audit Office, if that's possible. Thank you.
Well, the Audit Office review has only been announced, and so there's no update as such to be able to be given on that. With respect to the performance and whether or not it's effective, the Chief Commissioner specifically addressed performance matters in the PACWAC annual review for 2022-23. From the initial statistics prepared in advance of the Chief Commissioner's annual report 23-24, performance continues to improve, with the Commission's performance showing the highest increase in decisions over the past 5 years. The final report will be published later in the autumn, and hopefully members will be pleased at the progress being made.
Tommy Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question 9, please.
Minister.
My department is committed to delivering its responsibilities under the Climate Change Northern Ireland Act 2022 and in supporting DAERA in the development of the first Northern Ireland Climate Action Plan. While the Department of Justice is not a sectoral lead under the Act, we aim to contribute to the sectors of buildings, transport and energy. Our 2023 outline sustainable strategy sets out our goals and supporting actions to reduce our carbon footprint. For example, we have established in 2021-22 as our baseline year for measuring our energy consumption and reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. We have an active information programme in place to encourage behavioural change with our staff, both in the workplace and at home.
Mr Donnelly.
Thanks to the Minister for her answer so far. Could the Minister give some detail on the scope of her department's sustainability strategy?
The Department strategy covers the core department and its agencies. Central to the delivery of the Department strategy are the respective strategies of NICTS, Northern Ireland Prison Service and PSNI, and they have their own goals and targets and are reported on separately. The Department's agenda is progressed under 3 sustainability pillars: economic, social and environmental, each with their own supporting actions. Key to the delivery of the strategy was the establishment of that baseline year as 2021-22, so we can manage our energy consumption and measure it against that particular aspect. We have some key initiatives in progress. The solar farm at Hyde Bank Wood is now operational and has the capacity to reduce electricity bills by up to £60,000 per year. Prison Service are also working in collaboration with the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, RSPB and Woodland Trust to develop biodiversity action plans for each of our sites, because one thing we do have is space and land. They're also playing a leading role in sustainability in prison. An international conference is being held in York on the 24th and 25th of September, to which they will be making contributions. And then finally, we have solar panels installed in several courthouses, including in Landslides. But most importantly, Mr Speaker, modernisation of the Royal Courts of Justice project aspires to make the Royal Courts of Justice a building of the same era as this one, the first fully decarbonised Grade A listed building in Northern Ireland. That also includes refurbishment of the Old Town Hall building when it reopens, and I think will make a significant impact both in terms of heritage and in terms of the environment.
Question 12, please.
Minister.
I will consider the findings and recommendations of the review in due course and will publish the findings as appropriate following consultation with key stakeholders, including the Justice Committee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Minister for her brevity. Could I just ask that, given that we've said we're going to finish this review by December, and if we think that the policing board is so key to policing, do we not think that we've pushed this in far too early and it should be given time to finish its review as it requires and deemed fit?
Minister.
Well, I'm aware of the members' concerns around the timeframe, but I think it is appropriate given the scope of the review and also given the urgency of the report. If the independent reviewers consider they need additional time, of course, I'll be open to considering it. I'm also aware that it's important too that we get results from this and are able to look forward. So I think both from the policing board's point of view and from the departments, it is important that we try to keep this a short and tightly focused review that deals with the main issues which actually instigated the review in the first place.
John Blair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Minister has just at the end there answered the question I anticipated making. So I'm going to ask instead that to try and clarify the time it has taken up to this point. Isn't it the case, through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, that some of the to and fro from the policing board to the department caused delay until this juncture, and that none of the delay was caused by the department itself?
Mr.
Well, I think there are a number of things. I mean, first of all, when I came back in February, I reflected on the fact that the policing board had intended to take forward a review itself, and I decided on balance that in order to ensure that that was as independent as possible and would command as much public confidence as possible, that it would be better for the sponsor department of DOJ to take that forward. We then had to look at the terms of reference of the review, and obviously there have been things that have happened in the interim, which as a result mean that the terms of reference need to be slightly wider than was originally anticipated. And then finally, we had to find the correct people to take that review forward and to do that in a timely fashion. That might sound like a lot of words to say that it was not as a straightforward an issue as perhaps people expected that it would be. The key thing for me is that it's now underway. The board are content with the terms of reference and the engagement with the panel has already commenced.
Matthew Till.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, I welcome the fact that this independent review was announced. There has been an occasional challenge and pushback in this chamber about your responsibility for policing. So can you confirm for the record that should this independent review come back with substantive recommendations for either legislative, regulatory or any other change, that it will be your department which takes those reforms forward?
Well, I can't anticipate what they will come forward with, and therefore I can't anticipate which department it would be that would take it forward. Many of the structures that surround the tripartite arrangements for policing and justice are not devolved and are part of the 1998 Act and would need to be dealt with at Westminster. Others are devolved to my department. And yes, I accept that for some members it has been incredibly difficult to come to terms with the fact that I cannot answer questions on behalf of the policing on operational matters. But this is not an operational policing review. This is a review of the board and its relationships, and it is entirely appropriate that it's done independently, but the report will also be presented to the board.
Dan Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, question 13.
Minister.
The budget allocation attributed to the PSNI part-time reserve is an operational matter for the Chief Constable, who continues to be accountable to the Policing Board. It is important that I respect his operational independence and that of the Policing Board itself.
Minister. Ms Dodds, rather.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Minister will agree with me that many of our part-time reserve have served through terrible times in Northern Ireland. They've faced great and personal danger as they continue their ordinary workplace and serve our community and ensure our safety. Will the Minister ensure that whether the funding is brought about by herself or the Chief Constable, that there is at least a good discussion about a fair allocation to these brave officers?
Minister.
I think it's important that everyone who serves in the PSNI, whether they be officers, part-time reserve or members of staff, are properly remunerated for the work that they do and the risk that they take on our behalf. Ultimately, I have to, as does the Chief Constable and indeed every other arm's-length body, we have to live within our budget, and we strive to do so and be responsible with public money, but we recognise that there are real challenges. The part-time reserve is a matter entirely for the Chief Constable. Whether he wishes to strengthen it, whether he wishes to reduce its complement, is again a matter for him and not one for me as Justice Minister, but I'm absolutely committed that irrespective of which part of the PSNI people serve, that they will be properly remunerated for the work that they do.
Andy Allen. Minister.
Given the complexity of ASB, it cannot be addressed by the criminal justice system alone. It requires effective partnership working across local and central government to identify the causes and put in place solutions to prevent incidents arising and to tackle the cumulative impact that ASB has on individuals and communities. This partnership approach is evidenced by the work of the Policing and Community Safety Partnerships, funded by my department and the Policing Board, for which tackling ASB is a key strategic priority. PCSPs lead in my department's operational response to specific concerns at a local level, working with designated partners, local statutory bodies and agencies, the voluntary sector and the community sector to tackle actual and perceived ASB in our communities. At a strategic level, the Community Safety Network, chaired by my department, promotes shared and collective ownership by partners both in and outside of justice to ensure a collaborative response to a multifaceted community safety issue such as ASB. Additionally, where a criminal justice response is appropriate and to ensure the relative authorities have effective and proportionate enforcement powers, my department has led a multi-agency cross-departmental review of ASB legislation, launched a joint public consultation with DFC on potential legislative change and is now progressing with the outworkings of that consultation.
I call Peter McReynolds, or Andale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. And as the Minister has highlighted the impact of antisocial behaviour on so many within our society, can the Minister advise what steps her department's taken, perhaps in conjunction with the PSNI, to clamp down on the illegal sale of fireworks, which can often be used as part of ASB?
Minister.
Well, there is significant work that is ongoing, particularly at this time of year, around fireworks, and it's something that we work together with the PSNI and others on. There is a strong regulatory framework already in place regarding fireworks, and where people fail to either comply with it in terms of sales or purchase, there are penalties available for that that are used. I think more importantly is to ask people to be responsible around the use of fireworks. The noise can be distressing both for children, for adults, and particularly for animals. There are now low noise fireworks available that have all the pizzazz and none of the fear attached to them, and I think it's something that people should increasingly consider using.
Peter McReynolds.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, do you share my absolute condemnation of the ongoing and sustained objects placed at the Henry Jones playing fields in East Belfast and the disruption this is having on sports, education and the local community?
Minister.
I do, and I think it goes way beyond antisocial. I think it's actually veering into the space of hate crime in terms of the intimidation of the GAA users of that pitch. I don't think it's acceptable. I think it is incredibly disruptive, not only to those who play GAA, but to those who use the pitches for other purposes and for other sports. It's incredibly disrespectful and disruptive to the children, both of the nursery and local primary school, and also to their parents. And I do think that those who are behind this campaign really need to catch themselves on and recognise that there is space enough in this world for us all, and what we need to do is respect other people's traditions and allow them to get on with their lives in peace and quiet without this disruption. It also, I have to say, is becoming a drain on PSNI resources, which is hardly helpful at a time when we need the PSNI to be active, preventing crime and dealing with serious issues, rather than this kind of stupid behaviour which is completely disruptive and completely unnecessary.
Mr. Carroll's not in his place, so that brings to a conclusion questions to the Minister, and congratulations and get them all done, Minister. I think that's the first. We now move to topical questions, and I call Justin McNulty.
Minister, you may have seen journalist Rebecca Black's worrying piece in today's Irish News on a recent damning report from the Commissioner for Victims of Crime, Geraldine Hanna, that identified there are only 7% of crime victims who are confident that the North's criminal justice system can deliver for them. Do you recognise that the justice system is failing victims, and what action do you propose to take to address this damning reality?
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Commissioner Designate for engaging with victims of crime and seeking feedback on their experience of the criminal justice system. It's essential that victims feel confident that when they report a crime, they'll have their case investigated and prosecuted where there's evidence to support a prosecution, and that they will be treated appropriately and sensitively throughout the system. Right across the criminal justice system, a lot of work has already been progressed to improve the experiences of and support for victims of crime, and to ensure that they receive the services they're entitled to under the Victims' Charter. This includes ensuring victims can avail of emotional support when giving evidence, which the Department funds through Victim Support NI and the NSPCC. My department allocates funding of around £1.8 million per year for the provision of support services to victims and witnesses by Victim Support and NSPCC's Young Witness Service. However, I would say this, that if we had more resource, first of all, the justice system would speed up. Secondly, people would get a resolution of their case much more quickly. Thirdly, we would be able to provide better service, because often it is change at the last minute because people are not fully prepared, that causes delay. And all of those things impact on people's system, or people's view of the system. But there is a huge challenge ahead if we are to ensure that our justice system improves. It will require investment. I have been asking for that investment for some time.
Mr McNulty.
Thank the Minister for her answer. The survey results show that the satisfaction with treatment by the police was only 8%, with respondents citing that incidents, particularly of domestic abuse, were belittled and not taken seriously, and that officers were not trained to deal with sexual assault. These statements are in direct contrast to the aims of the domestic and sexual abuse strategy launched by your department last week. Would the Minister accept that with the absence of a systemic reform in her department and the budget set by her department actively harms victims and deters them from coming forward to report crimes?
Minister.
I agree that there's been a lack of systemic reform in my department. Quite the contrary, we have led the way in terms of the domestic abuse offence in the last mandate, legislating for domestic abuse, and also in that domestic abuse legislation putting forward the need for training for police officers, which was included in that, and that has been ongoing. That is not in any way to answer for the PSNI and their role in this, and that's something that I'm sure your colleagues will take up through the policing board, where the Chief Constable can be questioned about policing response. However, it is disappointing when people have negative experiences, which is why I spend a considerable amount of my time listening to victims, both of domestic and sexual violence, but also of other crimes, so that I can be clear that the pathway that we have plotted out is the one that is actually followed in real time. That is often not the case, and only some of it is down to resourcing. But a significant part of it in terms of my department is around leadership, and I think we have not failed to show that leadership, either in terms of support for victims and witnesses, or in terms of, for example, opening the remote evidence centres, or in terms of the support that we offer to vulnerable victims and witnesses. The question, I guess, at the end of the day is whether people feel at the point of sentence that they have actually got what they wanted, and unfortunately that's often not the case.
Dennis.
Can I ask the Minister to outline the state of the current prison population and specifically capacity within the prison system?
Minister.
At the moment, the prison population is sitting in excess of 1,800 prisoners. We have full capacity in McGilligan at around 500 prisoners. We have still some capacity in both Maghaberry and in Hydebank. But in the women's prison, there is again growing numbers of women being committed to prison over recent years, and we're seeing a general upward trend. The reason that we have capacity in the system in Maghaberry is solely because we've been able to open 2 of the old square houses that had been closed, and we've been able to repurpose those and bring them back into use, but it's not an ideal situation. It requires more intensive numbers of prison officers in order to look after the prisoners in those houses. And it is a significant challenge, I have to say, for the department. We're not in the same situation as some other regions have been in terms, for example, of having to consider early release or some of the more extreme measures around tripling up within the prison system. But we do still have a prison oversight working group that is looking at how we can drive those numbers down. And we also have a remand working group, because at the minute in Maghaberry 50% of those in prison have not yet been sentenced.
Ms. Ennis.
Thank the Minister for her response, and probably as a follow-on from my last question, does the Minister agree that access to education, training and rehabilitation should be the focus, the primary focus of our prisons, and what plans does the Minister have to increase the uptake and the access to rehabilitation and education courses so that we can actually drive down the reoffending rates?
Sir.
Well, we have been driving up the number of people who are participating in the education system, and as I say, particularly with the more general kinds of education, we can often extend that for short-term sentencing and also for those on remand. But it's much more difficult when we're talking about offender-related programmes where people are still maintaining that they're innocent and haven't yet been sentenced. It is a challenge because every time we move people from their cells to the education facility, that requires resource, and that resource has to be found from somewhere. At the moment in prisons, we are very highly reliant on overtime. That is a short-term fix. It is not a long-term solution to the problems that we face.
Ciara Ferguson.
Speaker, can I ask the Minister, within the prison system, what specific rules currently exist in relation to adjudications by governors? And that's in relation to the adjudications, the sanctions that are given out, and grounds for appeal.
Minister.
We operate a progressive regime within the prison system in Northern Ireland, so there are both rewards and penalties depending on people's behaviours. The adjudication process that goes on happens with the governors, and there is an appeal mechanism against that. But I think the best thing perhaps to do is for me to furnish the member with a copy of prison rules so that you can see yourself the issues on which the prison authorities would regularly be adjudicating, and perhaps get a better feel for how the process works.
Ferguson.
And I would very much appreciate that. Could I ask the Minister, has there been any consideration given to a departmental review of adjudications by governors in prisons?
Minister.
Hasn't at this stage. I think when we get our regular reviews of prisons, adjudications are one of the things that Jenny will look at in terms of the work that goes on within our prisons. We did have a situation back in 2005 when our prisons were considered to be fairly volatile and unsafe places. That is no longer the case. I think that progressive regime that has been put in place is one of the reasons why that has stabilised, and therefore at the moment it wouldn't be my intention to do a major review of that, but of course we're always open to hear if people have different experiences.
Minister, can you provide us with an update on your department's implementation of the Post Office Horizons System Offences Act 2024, please?
Minister.
So on the 19th of September 2024, my department issued letters to 12 individuals advising them that their convictions had been quashed by Post Office Horizons System Offences Act 2024. In total, we believe that covers about 116 convictions that have been quashed to date. That will enable those individuals to receive their financial redress. Further to these letters, the department is coordinating the process of updating criminal records databases to reflect the quashing of the convictions, and the individuals will receive a further letter once that process has been completed. Work is ongoing to review the convictions of other individuals that may be within scope of the Act, and I would take this opportunity, Mr Speaker, to encourage anyone who believes they have a conviction for a relevant offence and who has not received a letter to date to contact my department to ensure that an assessment of their conviction is undertaken. The Act will obviously not undo the harm and distress that was caused, but I hope it will go some way towards lifting the burden on those affected.
Ms Armstrong.
Thank you, Minister. You've mentioned about the burden. When do you think that those affected could expect to receive their compensation?
Minister.
Being as thorough as possible to ensure that no one is being missed. However, despite extensive searches, we don't yet have enough information for some individuals, and it would be important for them to get in touch with us to see if they are within the scope of the Act. In terms of when they would expect them to get their compensation, the financial redress schemes are managed by the Department for Business and Trade on a UK-wide basis. So our focus in DOJ is to overturn the convictions and delete the cautions. If there is, however, undue delay in sub-postmasters here accessing financial redress, I would of course be happy to raise this with ministerial counterparts.
Dixon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I ask the Minister to outline the level of cooperation with the Department of Health and in particular the Minister of Health, given the high impact that mental health issues have both within our prisons and the wider justice system?
Minister.
There are many areas within the justice system where the Department of Health and the Department of Justice work together. So, for example, we already do so around domestic and sexual violence and abuse, where we launched a joint strategy last week. We also, along with the Department of Education, launched a further strategy on child criminal exploitation this week. So there is a lot of ongoing working, and mental health is a key part of that. As you know, within prisons, for example, all of the health care is provided by the Health and Social Care Trusts. So there is a challenge, however, in that early intervention in the community, alternative placements and support for those with severe mental health issues in the community, and an absence of adequate funding in that space is leading to people increasingly being committed to prison who have serious mental health issues. That is a challenge for the prison system. It is a challenge for the PSNI in particular, who often have to interface with people who are having serious mental health breakdowns, and therefore I think it is something that we can work together further on going forward in terms of resolving those issues.
I call Connie Egan. Dixon, sorry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, mental health pathways are vitally important, particularly for those in prison who have mental health needs. But can the Minister outline for us what happens and how they are reconnected with community mental health services once they have left prison?
Minister.
Well, this is historically one of the really difficult parts of the system, the transition, and whilst we do a lot of work to try and ensure that there is a proper transition for people leaving custody, both in terms of having accommodation and also having support in the community, it is not always a seamless process. Unfortunately for many prisoners, when they go back into the community, they then have to go find their own GP because they don't know where they're going to be living, and then they have to be referred by their GP into mental health services. So prisons are trying with the Department of Health to look at how we can streamline those processes. The same is true when it comes to housing. The ideal situation is that we would in advance know where every prisoner is going to be living, have them pre-registered with a GP so that they're able to receive any medication, and also ensure that they have access to the therapeutic services that they've been receiving in prison when they leave. However, unfortunately, that is not currently the case.
Thank you, Minister. Could I please ask for an update on the domestic and sexual abuse strategy which your department launched last week, and specifically how that will work with the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy?
Minister.
Well, thank you. On the 25th of September, along with the Minister of Health, we announced the launch of the jointly led Department of Health, Department of Justice 7-year domestic and sexual abuse strategy. It was launched at an event hosted by the NSPCC and attended by those in the voluntary and community sector who helped shape the strategy along with departmental officials. One of the reasons we went to the NSPCC was because we recognised the impact that domestic and sexual violence has on children and young people. It's closely aligned to the Executive's Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, but importantly is gender inclusive. I also announced the introduction of a small grant scheme that we will build on if and when further funding becomes available. That will offer members of the voluntary and community sector the opportunity to apply for funding to support new ideas and initiatives that align with our strategic objectives within the strategy. The grants will initially be drawn from our cross-cutting domestic and sexual abuse funding, with the goal of supporting vital work carried out by frontline organisations. We will also be working closely with the Executive Office colleagues to ensure that there is no duplication, but rather that we reinforce the same messages as we try to end harm in our communities.
Ms Egan.
Thank you, Minister. Relevant to both those strategies is the very successful Sexual Offences and Legal Advisor scheme run by your department. Can I please ask if there's any plans to develop this scheme further?
Minister.
Yes, Sir John Gillen recommended that publicly funded independent legal advice should be made available to all victims in cases of serious sexual offences, and we introduced the SOLAs as a response of that. That has been overwhelmingly positive in terms of feedback, and so I was really pleased to be able to confirm, as part of the recommendations of the Strategy's Action Plan, that we're now going to launch an equivalent but very specific service for children and young people. The application process for the legal advisor positions that are available for that closes on the 1st of October. The impacts on children are understandably more extreme of this kind of violence, and having met with families with young victims who have told me directly how challenging it can be to engage with the criminal justice process, I believe that without access to advice on what the legal system might involve or require, and on what their rights are as they navigate their way through, we're adding to victims' anxiety and contributing to their reluctance to engage. I think it's really important that we're able to do that, and we will also beyond that be looking at how we can have a right to be heard within the court itself, so that where people, at the moment it's pre-trial, but for specific pre-trial hearings, that those legal advisors will be able to attend the court and be heard with the victim.
That brings to conclusion questions to the Minister for Justice. Now members could take their ease and we'll resume the previous debate.
Order, members. We now return to the debate on mental health provision in Northern Ireland, and I call on Mark Durkin to conclude and wind up the debate on the motion. And Mark, I want to advise you have 10 minutes to wind. Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for their contributions to the debate. I'm sure there isn't one person here who hasn't been affected by poor mental health in some way or other, or even by the scourge of suicide in our society. And I'm sure most of us actually struggle with stuff ourselves, and I would also like to commend Claire Sugden in speaking out this morning about her own issues. and reminding others that they're not alone and that there is, we talk about how bad things are, but never forget there is help out there and people should seek it if they need it. But while advocates are speaking up every day to raise awareness around their mental health battles, that work isn't being backed up by adequate financial investment from government. It's deeply concerning that in a time of relative peace here in the north, that the number of lives lost to suicide now exceeds those lost during the Troubles. While we've moved away from the violent conflict of the past, many now face a silent crisis, a mental health epidemic that continues to claim lives. And while the suicide statistics are shocking, they're the tip of the iceberg when it comes to lives lost and destroyed due to poor mental health. Fostering reconciliation and true peace is about more than the absence of conflict. It's about creating a society where people feel more resilient, where they can access help when they need it, and it's completely unacceptable that today half of children and adults are waiting longer than 9 weeks, when in crisis, to access mental health support. The escalation, both in numbers and severity of illnesses, has been heartbreaking to bear witness to. Those at the coalface are buckling under the weight of demand, and I'd like to place on record my gratitude for the invaluable work of organisations in my own constituency, yes, right across the north and beyond, who are shining examples of the approach that we need to take to tackle the crisis head on. I would start naming names, but I'd be fearful that omission might lead to offence. Yet instead of expanding government funding to meet rising demand, we're seeing some of these lifeline services shrink or disappear altogether. I recently raised the plight of Men's Action Network in my own constituency. This double blow leaves vulnerable people without the support they desperately need, pushing them further into crisis. Mr Middleton referred to the success of local charity Have Your Tomorrows, and I joined him at the opening of their brilliant new premises on Friday. That's a remarkable achievement. It's particularly remarkable given that they've achieved that without one penny of government support. One key issue which has been touched upon is the need for tailored services, and one of the areas which I'm concerned about, and have raised it before in the Chamber, is the lack of bespoke mental health services for individuals with autism. As we know from the devastating statistics, autistic adults are 9 times more likely to die by suicide, and autistic children are 20 times more likely to self-harm. Yet we still have mental health professionals who are not trained in autism working with autistic people, which is potentially negligent. There is no mention within the autism strategy of what the plans are to support autistic adults with their mental health, and this is something I'll no doubt return to with the Minister again to try and establish what autism-specific support we will see for people with autism, and if he'll work to introduce mandatory autism training for all mental health practitioners. I do, however, accept that this is just one piece of an absolutely massive and complex puzzle. Another vital element of this discussion is the co-occurring conditions of addiction and mental ill health, and the need for a dual diagnosis approach. Both conditions remain a harrowing feature in the lives of so many people here, and it's a cycle that can prove difficult to escape, especially for those suffering socio-economic disadvantage. Those brave enough to actually seek support often find themselves passed from pillar to post in efforts to find meaningful and appropriate services and support. The lack of clear targets, comprehensive data and transparency remains a significant barrier to effective care and accountability. It makes assessing needs, allocation of resources and tracking progress extremely difficult. I commend the work, as others have, of PPR and New Script, advocating for these improvements that would ensure services are effective and targeted. The amendment before us today would, in my view, our view, remove that accountability from the executive. If, and they do, the DUP agree that making the prevention of poor mental health and suicide a priority across all departments, while they remove reference to the programme for government. Our concern is that if the amendment passes, and we hope that it doesn't, are we merely paying lip service again without any real intention to act, or are we removing accountability for not acting?
The Minister did say in his contribution that the importance of a mental health champion, it was his idea, it was important that we have that independent voice, and that independent voice was standing just out in that great hall there today, saying that it was a priority that doesn't appear much in the programme for government, and that if we approve and agree with the amendment, we're removing something that the mental health champion is asking us. What's the point of having the independent voice if you're not going to listen to it?
Thank the member for his intervention and agree certainly with the point that he has made. It's crucial that we tackle the siloed approach. Collaborative work involving government departments, the PSNI, the public and local organisations is the only way to achieve meaningful results for people suffering. It isn't all bad news. Progress has been made and been referred to today. I'm pleased, like others, to see the rollout of perinatal mental health services across the region and the long overdue recognition of the importance of maternal mental health, helping to build healthier families and stronger communities. We must build on that model across the vast spectrum of mental health need. A few members have spoken about early intervention, which is key. The earlier the better, like the Healthy Happy Minds counselling programme for primary school children, as mentioned by Michelle Guy. It's a tragedy that this programme was cut with seemingly no hope of return. Teachers, parents and children alike felt the positive impact of this initiative. Mandatory mental well-being should be ingrained at an early age. The earlier we invest, the earlier we can empower children with the tools and skills they need to become resilient adults. This won't only identify issues before they escalate and reduce future strain on the health system, but it means that people will live healthier lives, building the foundation for a healthier, more resilient society, the kind of prosperous and peaceful society we dreamed of for the Peace Babies generation. To conclude, this issue is about so much more than investing in mental health services. It requires a whole system approach, a system that doesn't force working families, or any families, to queue for food banks, where children have somewhere to call home, where people aren't shifted from hotel to hostel to B&B, unable to put down roots. Building families and societies on such unstable footing means an entire generation has been left without the village they need to raise their children and support networks from which they can build their lives. Creating a bonded, thriving society requires shared responsibility, both within communities and collaboration across government departments. A refusal to enshrine improved mental health and suicide prevention in a new programme for government is a refusal by the Executive to take that responsibility. Thank you.
Mark, so the question is that the amendment standing in the name of Diane Dodds and Alan Robinson be made. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary if any noes? No. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary if any noes? No. Clear the lobbies. The question will be put in 3 minutes. Order members. Order members, will you take your seats? Okay. So the amendment standing in the name of Diane Dodds and Alan Robinson be made. All those in favour say aye. Can't we have any noes? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Okay. Soon to say no, you need to mean no, Colin. Okay. Okay. So do we have tellers? Okay, tellers have been appointed as follows. Tellers for the ayes, tellers for the ayes are Harry Harvey and Peter Martin. Tellers for the noes are Colin McGrath and Patsy McGlone. Clear the lobbies. The House will divide. Ayes to my right and noes to my left. Secure the doors. Order, members. Order, members. Can you please resume your seats? Clerk, could you please read the motion or the results?
77 members voted, 70 members voted aye, 7 members voted no. The amendment is therefore agreed.
Okay, so the question is that the motion as amended be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary of any noes? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Members, please take your ease.
Members, order. The next item of business is a motion from the opposition on the reinstatement of community and voluntary funding. Clerk, please read the motion.
That this Assembly commends the work of the community and voluntary sector, who provide vital mental health services for the most vulnerable in society, recognises the immense challenges that will be faced by the health service as a result of a 50% cut to their core grant funding, and calls on the Minister of Health to reinstate this funding as a matter of urgency.
Thank you, and I call Mark Durkin to move the motion on behalf of the opposition.
Move.
Thank you. The Business Committee has agreed to allow up to 1 hour 30 minutes for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have 10 minutes to propose and 10 minutes to wind. As an amendment has been selected and is published on the Marshall's list, the Business Committee has agreed that 15 minutes will be added to the total time for the debate. Please open the debate on the motion.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by putting on record my and the SDLP's thanks for those community and voluntary sector services, many of whom were present today in the Long Gallery, who provide vital support to all areas in our society. But in particular, I'd like to pay tribute today to those mental health services and the teams behind them who go above and beyond each and every day in our communities. I know many of you will have met some of those teams today at the launch of the Mental Health Policy Alliance. Northern Ireland is a place unlike many others in Europe when it comes to the devastating and complex nature of mental health issues here. We're a society, as others mentioned in the earlier debate, still recovering from decades of some of the most barbaric tragedies. It's little wonder then that in recent years we still record the highest number of people with PTSD in the world. The toll this not only currently takes on our mental health services cannot be underestimated. In the absence of effective government delivery from Stormont, our voluntary and community sector have stepped into that breach, providing key services which have now become core. The cut, however, to core grant funding in 2023-24 had a devastating impact. It was a huge blow to those organisations who are the first line of defence in communities to poverty and inequality. I could not speak to this without mentioning the fact that it left Women's Aid NI as the only Women's Aid federation in the UK without state funding. This is unacceptable. Already, we're seeing other vital community-based services having to close their doors. And again, I had mentioned in the previous debate about Men's Action Network in my own constituency. We continue to see report after report come out about the health service, which call on a prevention-first approach to dealing with health. If we are serious about that, then we must also get serious about how we utilise and fund the vital services in the community and voluntary sector. From the care provided to young people suffering with their mental health, to the support given to those in the later years of their lives, this sector plays a vital role. At the publication of the mental health strategy, the Minister stated that he wanted to provide early intervention to prevent serious mental illness. If this is indeed the case, then Minister Nesbitt must appreciate that this preventative approach will only be possible and only be effective if and only if those mental health services receive adequate funding. And as the Health Minister's colleagues will no doubt articulate, this can't be a job for Minister Nesbitt alone. The entire executive must get serious about its approach to this sector. In the newly published draft programme for government, the community and voluntary sector is barely mentioned. Neither is mental health. While I appreciate that stakeholders are involved in the development of the new core grant funding scheme, that will come as cold comfort to those left behind in the here and now. It would also be remiss of me not to mention the elephant in the room regarding funding, namely the fact that this is now the 10th year in a row that a single-year budget has been agreed, despite the repeated calls and the professed support from all parties across the chamber and those in the health and social care sector for multi-year budgets. How can we expect our community and voluntary sector to thrive if we don't give them stable assurances in the form of multi-year funding? I'm fully aware of the context in which the budget was signed after a decade, more than a decade, of brutal Tory cuts and the long-term scarring caused by the underfunding of the health service relative to our huge level of need. But we'll only be adding salt to the wounds if we do not reinstate the core grant funding to its previous level and evolve the current way the community and voluntary sector is funded. The current funding scheme is clearly not fit for purpose. And it is right that it is reformed, as I know the Health Minister will be taking forward. The current failures of the scheme risks souring relationships beyond repair between the community and voluntary sector and the Department for Health, or government as a whole. And I would ask the Minister to do his best to rectify this and ensure that no more damage is done, that no more trust is eroded, and ensure that all organisations within the community and voluntary sector are afforded equal opportunity to funding. It's also important for us all not to lose hope. Examples have been shown before of successful funding models which have adequately supported mental health services. For 3 years, the Department of Health ran a successful mental health support fund, bringing together 80 charities and organisations who were tasked with supporting people in their mental health and well-being. Not only did this scheme encourage greater collaboration between mental health services, but it also granted them further funding which allowed them to carry out their services and provide support to an ever-expanding audience. Unfortunately, this scheme, like so many others, was discontinued due to funding constraints. If we are to explore more schemes like the mental health support scheme, then we must ensure there is adequate funding available to do so. The community and voluntary sector can provide the key we need to unlock the deadlock our health service finds itself in. However, it's only through an adequate and stable source of core grant funding that this can take place. And I call today on the Minister to reinstate that core grant funding as a matter of urgencies. People everywhere and from all backgrounds appreciate the thankless work that the community and voluntary sector organisations undertake day in and day out. They are the very best of our society. People know, understand and value their work, and it's time that the Executive did the same. I propose the motion.
Thank you. I now call on Robbie Butler to move the amendment.
Moved, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. You will have 10 minutes to propose, Mr Butler, and 5 minutes to wind. All other speakers will have 5 minutes. Mr Butler.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'll just start before I go into the main thrust of what I want to say today, to speak to the opposition across the chamber, just to maybe let them know why we thought that it was so important that we got what I would call a significant but technical amendment to the motion, because I think it is incumbent on us all to recognise, and I think we have done that over previous months and in this last year, to recognise the pressures that the Department of Health specifically find itself under, and that will be realised when you look at the amount of motions, daily motions that are in this chamber, how often the Health Minister is here, how often he is called upon to deliver better health outcomes. But in reality, if we don't have the budget to meet that need, then there's very little that he and the department can do. The voluntary and community sector is a key partner in the delivery of many of the core HSE strategic aims. For instance, certain sectors such as young people, mental health, vulnerable families and elderly care are greatly dependent on the work and commitment of the sector and the organisations within it. And as such, for many years, the Department of Health has provided financial assistance via a core grant scheme to help many local voluntary organisations to help them meet some of their central administration costs in this instance. This was a very small investment when you look at the significant return that many and most, if not all of those organisations have played over a period of time. But of course, the historic and the existing scheme is far from perfect. Giving the same organisations year after year the same money whilst excluding others from even applying. I'm minded to Mr Durkin, who had spoken about Men's Action Network, for instance, who would have been barred from even applying given the conditions of the existing scheme. And this has led to mean that the scheme is no longer being efficient or as targeted as it should be. And there is a fundamental unfairness with the scheme, and until that issue is addressed, along with some recognition of the evolving nature of community and voluntary groups and the services that they offer, then the scheme will continue to remain unfair. And I think, again, pointed to some of the comments made by Mr Durkin, COVID has brought that into sharp focus, where we learnt the value of our community and voluntary sector and the amount that they actually carry for us. So it's become clear for some time that the scheme needed to be reformed. And so that's why I and my party very much welcomed the most recent consultation a number of years ago. I think Robin Swan, as Minister, embarked on that. But unfortunately, however, instead of the process identifying the solutions, the application process and its eventual unsuccessful outcomes only heightened the uncertainty and frustration experienced by many of those groups who will have contacted many of the MLAs in this chamber today. And shortly after the previous attempt to rerun the scheme that fell flat, in the absence of a functioning assembly and in light of no agreed budget and major funding challenges, the department then in 2023-24 deemed it necessary to reduce the core grant funding by 50%. And this was a hammer blow to the sector, which we recognised both financially and psychologically. And whilst there was then some hope following the restoration of the executive, unfortunately the budgetary reality compounded by this Assembly's and Executive's decision to pass a below-need health budget compounded the situation. I do recall that the removal of all core grant funding was one of the options set out by the Department in the response to the 24-25 budget. But thankfully, no doubt with some internal challenge, I'm sure the Minister worked to avoid such a scenario, and could be somewhat grateful for that. Even when the core grant scheme is fully funded at 3.6 million, however, it's still only a small fraction of the investment that is made by core granted voluntary and community sector organisations. And whilst core granted organisations alone may hold annual formal contracts to the tune of almost 10 times the 3.6 million, there is no doubt that the sector provides value for money, hand over fist in everything that they do. A pound invested in the community and voluntary sector often goes so much further than the same pound would within the health and social care system. So each and every day I see the innovation as well as the efficiency on display within the sector. But they need clarity. And that is why, whilst I welcome the retention of some of the funding this year, in reality we need a new scheme. So I very much hope that the conversation currently happening, including the one today in this chamber and across the sector, leads to a successful outcome for everyone. But let's be in no doubt that if the Health Minister had the money to deliver, he would deliver the acts of this chamber. And I would just ask the House to reflect on the fact that those conversations need to be held in conjunction, particularly with the Minister for Finance and executive colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Liz Kimmins.
The community voluntary sector are a crucial part of our health service and deliver services that not only fill the gaps in service provision, but are often a lifeline to the many people they support at a grassroots level in all of our communities. In my constituency of Newry and Armagh, we are very lucky to have a community voluntary sector that is extremely vibrant and plays a significant role in strengthening our communities and supporting some of the most vulnerable people across our society. And they often do this on a shoestring budget, time after time demonstrating value for money and effectiveness in tackling the core issues affecting people's lives. Not only this, but the community and voluntary sector are extremely agile and more often than not can shape the services they provide to meet the changing needs of the communities they operate in. We saw this during COVID, and I see it every single day on the ground in my constituency and across the north. This is particularly important in mental health provision, where statutory services are stretched beyond capacity, and the community and voluntary sector have stepped in delivering bespoke mental health services to meet the needs of the people in their area. We have some of the most effective, impactful services such as the Crisis Cafe and PIP's Hope and Support in Newry and the Well in the Morns in South Down, who recognised the serious crises affecting the communities around them and responded by developing bespoke services which I have no doubt have saved many, many lives since their conception. Just last Friday I was delighted to attend the Crisis Cafe's Open Day in Newry, a service that is led by young people to deliver mental health support to other young people. We heard the testimonies from some of those young people who had previously engaged with the Crisis Cafe services when they were struggling with their own mental health. And following the success of the support they received, they are now helping to support others when they're experiencing similar difficulties. This to me shows the real value of our community and voluntary sector, and we simply cannot afford to lose the professionalism, the expertise and the efficiency that the community and voluntary sector deliver. Needless to say, often at a very low cost, that is not only changing the lives of thousands of people for the better, but is undoubtedly saving our health service huge amounts of money in the meantime. The cuts to the core grant funding programme has once again left the sector under intense pressure, and we all saw how detrimental that was when the European Social Fund ended last year. We run the huge risk of losing excellent services and, even more importantly, very experienced, highly skilled staff who cannot be expected to continue to remain living with the uncertainty that stop-start funding brings either. In the grand scheme of things, this is a relatively small amount of money that goes a long way and is essential that it is protected. Otherwise, the cost to society and to our health service will be much greater.
I call Diane Forsyth.
Deputy Speaker, and the voluntary community sector in Northern Ireland are delivering frontline health services to the public. They fill in the gaps of need where public services through the Department of Health and our local trusts do not reach. Without them, tens of thousands of people across Northern Ireland would have no mental health services at all. And in my area, these include some great organisations like Mourne Matters, the Regenerate Project in Gyms, My, and many more. The huge problem that we face is that the Health Minister and the Department of Health officials do not fully appreciate the scale of the healthcare services that the voluntary and community sector are providing. It is widely felt that the Health Minister and his officials do not fully appreciate and value the sector, and as chair of the all-party group for voluntary and community sector in this Assembly, this is the main theme coming from the groups. They do not feel valued. In a recent Public Accounts Committee hearing, I asked the health officials how many people in Northern Ireland were receiving mental health care services from the voluntary and community sector. They had no idea. I asked the Health Minister in June to detail how many healthcare patients in Northern Ireland were referred by his department, local trusts and GPs directly into the voluntary community sector for mental health services. He advised the information was not available. I do not believe he has an idea of the number, and we want to see him take steps to value the sector enough to find this out. I know that it is tens of thousands. I know in my constituency that the health workers panicked at the financial cliff edge last year, contacting me saying that they're referring thousands of people every month directly to the voluntary community sector groups like MenCap. And without them, these patients would have nowhere to be referred to. No pathway for these services exists. We do not want to see the role of our community and voluntary sector we want to see the role of our voluntary community sector valued and extended, not diminished. And the cut in the core grant funding has meant that many service providers supporting our health and social care system have been forced to divert resources away from supporting people in order to cover running costs. And back in April of this year, 51 community and voluntary groups wrote to the then Health Minister to appeal for a reinstatement of the core health grant as it would keep them existing. Nothing was done. The core health grant was £3.6 million a year and was cut by Robin Swan to £1.8 million a year. We are only calling for a reinstatement of £1.8 million per year, small in the overall scheme of the health budget. We don't support the amendment today as we do not accept that it is the Finance Minister's role to find extra money to take from other departments for items in the health budget. It is for the Health Minister to accept responsibility for the delivery of healthcare in Northern Ireland. He needs to recognise for just another £1.8 million in the core health grant, the return on investment is of huge value. The reinstatement of this funding would keep in place and secure the many voluntary and community sector organisations and keep tens of thousands of people receiving services. The Health Minister needs to take steps to quantify and appreciate the value and contribution of the sector. He needs to identify £1.8 million within his budget, which would be better used in this way. We still await transformation plans, and I would like to ask, has the Minister taken steps to review the health service for obvious inefficiencies? In a place like Northern Ireland, where we have 5 area-based health and social care trusts, I would imagine some steps to make simple efficiencies could be made. With well over 100 directors on significant salaries, duplicating administrative tasks across Northern Ireland, this comes to mind, and from practical examples of some inefficiencies presented in my constituency office on a regular basis, I am sure that £1.8 million could be identified. So today we support this motion to reinstate the funding for our much valued voluntary and community sector organisations and the work that they do to deliver services on mental health. But we do not support the amendment calling for the Finance Minister to respond rather than the Health Minister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank my SLP colleagues for bringing forward this motion today, and I reiterate the positive decision of the official opposition to use their 3 Opposition Day motions to focus on health and especially mental health. As highlighted in the previous debate, it was clear that the community and voluntary sector organisations provide an invaluable resource through the provision of mental health services for the most vulnerable in Northern Ireland. This is particularly important here because, as raised in the previous debate, we are continually dealing with the legacy of the Troubles and its impact on poor mental health. As I and other members have mentioned in the previous debate, it is concerning that more lives have been lost to suicide here since 1998 than those were killed in the Troubles. The community and voluntary groups we have in Northern Ireland and their hard-working staff and volunteers deserve to be acknowledged, and it is right that we use this debate and others to do so here today. I know of many groups in East Antrim, and I'm sure other MLAs will note groups in their own areas that are doing fantastic work supporting people in need. The 50% reduction in core grant funding in 2023 was extremely damaging and led to staff redundancies, reduction in services, and some organisations no longer being able to operate at all. A survey of core-funded organisations by children in Northern Ireland at the time showed that 62% were at risk of collapse if the grant scheme was not restored. It is important to remember that this decision was taken in the absence of ministers because there were no ministers in 2023, as a consequence of the one-party veto over the operation of this Assembly and this Executive. It is worrying that this veto remains in place and has been used by both of the 2 main parties and therefore could be used again. We only need to look at the 2023 budget and its devastating impact on core grant funding as evidence of why this cannot be allowed to happen again. As Mark mentioned, we need to move to multi-year budgets within the health service, but first we need to secure a multi-year government. We also need to acknowledge that many of these brilliant community and voluntary organisations whose hard work we all regularly see in our constituencies have in many respects filled the gap left by an absence of political leadership and, in the case of the Department of Health, from a failure to embrace necessary reform and transformation. The loss of funding has reduced the likelihood of the Department's mental health strategy being implemented. To take an example, Action 17 within the strategy requires the Department to fully integrate community and voluntary sector in mental health service delivery, with a lifespan approach, including the development of a protocol to make maximum use of the sector's expertise. How can this be actioned and implemented when the sector is struggling to survive? This also raises into question the unsustainability of our existing funding model, which is not something we can fully address in this Assembly, but which the new UK Government and the House of Commons must consider. We all know that Northern Ireland is underfunded relative to need. The Fiscal Council estimated that this underfunding has been by approximately £300 to £400 million per year since 2022, versus what we would receive if an appropriate fiscal floor was in place. But we cannot just turn to Westminster to solve our problems. In addition to the obvious need for institutional reform here, we need to reform how we approach our public finances and our health service, seeking to reduce costs of division across every executive department and reforming the mental health sector to prioritise early intervention and prevention. We need a collaborative approach between the Minister of Health and the Minister of Finance. Together, they should work to identify the necessary funding to ensure that these valuable community and voluntary sector organisations can continue to provide these essential services. But funding will not solely fix the issues facing the community and voluntary sector. Fundamental reform of our health and social care sector is necessary to ensure that our public services are equipped to deal with mental health crises and deal with individuals in a caring and compassionate manner. As I have mentioned, organisations are fulfilling these responsibilities and they should be completed by the Department and local trusts, but in some cases cannot due to the unprecedented pressures on our health service, specifically in relation to waiting lists. But we cannot continue with this status quo, and what we must do, what we can to support our community and voluntary sector and urgently reform how we deal with mental health services. Thank you.
Call Alan Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Like others, I rise to commend the incredible work of the community and voluntary sector in providing vital mental health services to some of the most vulnerable members of our society. These organisations are certainly the lifeblood of our place that we call home. They offer support, care, and some give hope to those who often feel lost or unheard. In every corner of this Assembly, we have witnessed the impact that these organisations have had. Whether it's a small charity offering support to the elderly, or helping vulnerable children, providing counselling services to those in crisis, or a community group helping people manage anxiety, depression or trauma, these groups stand at the forefront of our mental health care and they fill the gaps in our health service with compassion, with dedication and their expertise. I stand today not just to praise their work, but to highlight that our community and voluntary sector is facing an existential threat. The decision to cut their core grant funding by 50% last year has placed many of these organisations on the brink and has led to staff being laid off and forced them to change the way that they now operate. The cut isn't just a budget line, it is a lifeline severed for countless individuals and families who depend on these services for their mental health and well-being. One such children's charity has called the decision to maintain the cut as short-sighted. Indeed, if the grant scheme ceased, it is predicted that 62% would be at risk of collapse. Let us not forget that we are still recovering from the widespread mental health challenges exacerbated by the pandemic. Isolation, financial stress, grief and uncertainty have taken a toll on our people. We're seeing the long-term effects of this crisis on mental health, and the demand for services is higher than ever. Now imagine what is happening when half of the funding for these essential services disappears. The results are not good. Waiting lists are growing, nervous staff are being let go, and people in desperate need of support are being left to fend for themselves. The pressure on our already overburdened health system is being added to. The voluntary sector is often the first point of contact for individuals who might be hesitant to approach formal health services. They provide a safe space for people to share their struggles and access help without stigma or barriers. The health service simply cannot fill that void left by these cuts. In fact, we're setting ourselves up for an even bigger crisis. Without timely intervention, many individuals will end up in emergency departments or worse, in tragic situations that could have been prevented with early support. And we all know that prevention is better and more cost-effective than the cure. Surely it is far cheaper to fund these community services than to deal with the long-term consequences of untreated mental health issues later. Penny wise and pound foolish is a term we hear often in here. The evidence is clear. For every pound invested in mental health services, we save multiples in future costs to our health system and to our economy and to our society. And I agree with the children in Northern Ireland, the umbrella body for the children's sector, who says that community and voluntary sector organisations are not mere add-ons. They are integral components of the support systems who alleviate the pressure on statutory services. And they tackle complex issues at their roots and improve outcomes in crucial areas. Colleagues, the questions we must ask are simple. The health budget is well north of £7 billion, with £122 million added in June monitoring. Are we so far gone in this place that we can't afford £1.8 million to reinstate C&V core grant funding? Can I conclude, Mr Deputy Speaker, by asking the Minister, has he or will he be making a bid to uplift the core grant fund? I do look forward to responses to today, and I urge him to do all in his power to reverse these cuts to core grant funding and please reinstate the financial support that these vital organisations need to continue their good work. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Nina McAllister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak both in favour to the motion and to the amendment that has been put forward, and I want to thank the opposition for bringing forward this motion and all of the motions today, which I think are very important and will play a role in shaping how we discuss World Mental Health Day at our committee meeting on the 10th of October. But also, I would like to put on record our support to the sector, who over the past few years, both before COVID, during it and after, who have had to deal with their services being inundated. More and more people are turning to the community and voluntary sector for their help every day because they know that the health service cannot support them. Not that they do not wish to, but they simply do not have the capacity to support them. I recognise that the 50% cut in community and voluntary sector core grant is not matched by a 50% cut in services that are needed. We would like to see services being funded at the level of need, but of course I also recognise the situation in which every minister within the executive finds themselves in. But I would like to echo the points that have been made by many across the chamber that 1.8 million in the grand scheme of an entire health department's budget is not asking for the world. I also want to respect that the Minister claims that mental health is a leading priority for his, so I genuinely want to hear feedback on a number of the comments that I'm going to raise in my speech here today. Firstly, there are so many gaps, or so many groups across Northern Ireland that plug the gaps of the health service when it comes to mental health, and the core grant funding was able to provide some level of sustainable services. But let's be perfectly clear that before this cut in 50% of core funding, that it was not perfect and that there were services that were struggling then. And also want to highlight that funding for services operated within the community and voluntary sector often done so under very strict assistance, guidance and policy from the Department of Health through themselves. So many organisations that we all speak to right across our constituencies highlight the volume of hoops that they must jump through, and too often that it is not a subjective approach to mental health provision when it comes to that support from the department and all of the trusts.
We all know that what may work for one individual does not necessarily work for all, and that's why we must listen to the experts, those who are carrying out this service across Northern Ireland, as to what actually can help individuals in need. So therefore I do have some questions for the Minister. Within the mental health strategy, one of the recommendations was to fully integrate community and voluntary sector in mental health service delivery with a lifespan approach, including the development of a protocol to make maximum use of the sector's expertise. I would like to hear from the Minister a little bit as to where we are on this update, in particular because of the delivery plan in 24-25, in which the Department highlights that a review of exploring the optimal approach to engaging the community and voluntary sector in the development of mental health policy and provision is ongoing. But if we had implemented our previous provisions within the mental health strategy, I would like to have seen us a bit further along. So I look forward to hearing from the Minister on that aspect. We have heard from many organisations who've been in touch, both when the establishment of this, or when the Assembly came back in September and before, whenever all parties got together to actually finally establish an executive. And my colleague did point out the need for reform, otherwise this stop and go merry-go-round of politics is just going to further add to the exacerbation of the problems within the community and voluntary sector. Some of those organisations, such Community Foundation NI, have said that Mental Health Support Fund benefited an estimated 150,000 people. Children in NI said that 2/3 of the respondents to their review told them that they would have difficulties in sustaining their service levels with the funding cut in 23-24. So given the organisations are already providing feedback, I would also like to hear from the Minister about what his department has done to evaluate the impact of the core grant funding. I understand it is a priority for the Minister, but we would like to see actions even with regards to policy, and we will be supporting the amendment because we believe that the Finance Minister also has a role in ensuring that health is overseeing its efficiencies in the best way that it can to perhaps use and reinstate this 1.8 million funding.
Members, all those listed to speak have done so. I now call on the Minister of Health to respond. And Minister, you've got up to 15 minutes.
Deputy Speaker, thank you very much. For those members who put a premium on accuracy, let it go into the record that the decision to cut the core grant by 50% was not taken by Robin Swan. It was taken by the Permanent Secretary at the Department of Health. And the reason it was not taken by Robin Swan, or a member of this House, is because the Democratic Unionist Party refused us to practice devolution. And I would ask the member for Southdown to reflect on that, and in doing so, she may also care to reflect on the fact that the biggest financial blow to the voluntary and community sector in recent years has been the loss of the European Social Fund, lost because of Brexit, a policy supported by her party. Mrs. Forsyth claims I do not understand or appreciate the community and voluntary sector. I didn't hear a particularly robust evidence base, but I put it on record, Deputy Speaker, I became closely involved with aspects of the community and voluntary sector as a commissioner at the Commission for Victims and Survivors, where the task was to be a champion for the most vulnerable, those who had suffered the most over the 30 years we inflicted such terrible pain upon each other. And there were dozens of community and voluntary sector groups who were involved in supporting victims and survivors. And by and large, they emerged because somebody saw a loved one or a neighbour or a friend get hurt and tried to help. And in doing so then, other people went to them and said, well, you're helping your cousin or your neighbour. I have a cousin or a neighbour who was hurt. Can you help them too? And suddenly, they're in charge of a voluntary community sector looking after victims and survivors. Suddenly, They are chief executives, they are human resource managers, they are financial directors. They never started out to become such, and they needed help. And that, to a large extent, was the genesis of the core grant scheme. And as the mover of the motion said, they're among the very best of our society. And as a commissioner, I became very aware of the impact of cuts in budgets, of changes in budgets, the impact of a single-year budget, the impact particularly of constant delays in confirming state funding. So, for example, a group would think of a new service for their service users. They would advertise for an expert to deliver that service. That expert would get a one-year contract, and after 6 or 9 months they would ask, is my contract being renewed? And the answer would be, we're waiting to hear from government. And in the meantime, that person would see a job in the statutory sector, a safe job, a permanent job. And off they would go, leaving the service users in a worse position than they began in, because they'd gone up in the game of snakes and ladders. They'd gone up a lovely, lovely ladder to a better place. But now they'd hit the snake and they'd gone back down again. And they say they knew there was better to be had. So I do believe that I understand and appreciate the work of the community and the voluntary sector. And my department has both supported and relied on the sector for many, many years. In some cases, the sector provides services under contract to health and social care bodies, including the Health and Social Care Trusts. The Department of Health has also supported the sector through this core grant scheme, a system that is intended to be an enabler by covering core organisational costs. What it is not intended to do is to cover the full cost of service delivery. Rather, it's making it possible for organisations to function and to potentially bid for other sources of funding. I've had it described to me on occasion as a lever, a way to demonstrate to other funders that the organisation is worth investing in because we, as a devolved government, believe in them and back them financially. So it is important to the organisations that receive it. It's important to the Department of Health, and it's important to government in the round that we continue with core granting. And while I recognise the valuable role the sector has to play and the importance of investing in it, all members of this House will be aware of the funding position the Department of Health found itself in both last year and again this year, and I am nearly deafened by the irony klaxon, particularly coming from my right. The budget position has made it necessary to take incredibly difficult funding decisions, to choose between the things that need to be funded to save life and limb, Deputy Speaker, and the things that we would like to fund. And I can tell you, having to choose between funding critical statutory services and supporting the voluntary and community sector because it's a good, productive and proper thing to do is a very, very unpleasant place to find yourself. And I know, Deputy Speaker, the sector is facing an incredibly challenging financial landscape at the minute. But let us face it, let us be honest, so are all departments, and we all know what has been going on. Permanent secretaries and senior leadership teams looking at everything that their department does that costs money and putting those actions into one of two columns: statutory responsibility and non-statutory. And if you're in the second column, you are struggling.
Minister, for giving way, and I understand the financial position that you're in. Would you accept that some of the preventative work would be much more cost effective and would hopefully result in not ending up in the hospital or with needing greater psychiatric input, which is a saving to us? So I'm just wondering if we can look more at that way of approach.
Well, I thank the member for her intervention, and I can tell her that many times a week, if not daily, I'm given a presentation which says, if you invest in preventative measures, if you put some money into transformation here, that relatively small amount of money will release a comparatively large amount of money down the line. But where is that transformational money to come from? because currently it does not exist, and the members who voted for the budget must take their element of responsibility for that. But I say to the member, yes, one of the things I want to do is to move from care in hospitals to care in the community, and I think that will be a very cost-effective way of doing business. I also want to move from a health service which is primarily about curing the sick to a health service which keeps the healthy healthy. And I think if we can find the funds for those transformative issues, we will release money at the other end, on the right-hand side, as they say. Well, despite the financial challenges, I took a decision back in July to maintain my department's core grant scheme in 2024-25, and much as I would have liked to have restored the full grant, that was simply not possible in the circumstances. And I understand members will say, but look at your budget, 7.9 billion, how can you not find another 1.8? But that is a measure of how constrained the budget is. And yes, I am looking for efficiencies. And yes, I have sat down, for example, with the Trust chairs, and we've had some very uncomfortable conversations about the need to be more productive and to be more efficient. But will that yield significant financial savings in the rest of this financial year? That is very, very unlikely. To ease the huge financial pressures still to this day weighing down on my department, there could have been an outcome where there was nothing at all invested in the core grant scheme. But to me, that was unacceptable. And I was clear, despite the difficulties it created elsewhere, I wanted to maintain at least the same level as last year. And I hope this has made a positive contribution towards the financial sustainability of the 61 organisations in receipt of the grant. So while I was able to reinstate in part, I was able to protect the investment in frontline services provided by the sector. Now, it is important to note the majority of organisations currently in receipt of core grant funding also hold service delivery contracts. That's with my department's arm's length bodies. So core grant is not their only source of HSC income. Indeed, in financial year 23-24, 52 of the 61 recipients held service delivery contracts, and the total value of those contracts, Deputy Speaker, was £53 million. I am fully committed to supporting the sector financially going forward, but that commitment will only take me so far. I need a budget allocation which permits me to do so, and I welcome the amendment from my party colleagues to the motion being debated today. The reality is the budget for the past 2 years has fallen significantly short.
Look, I thank the Minister, and it's just going back to his previous comments around core grant funding only being one aspect, and I touched on that in my speech, particularly around the service delivery contracts. And would the Minister commit to actually specifically looking at that element of the bureaucracy around what I mentioned and what is often described as the jumping through the hoops of the various organisations, where the department tries to place a one-size-fits-all, rather than those actual organisations being able to actually just prescribe what is best for the individual patient's needs?
Well, I thank the member for her intervention, and I think that speaks to a belief I have formed rather quickly in my time as the Minister of Health, which is, I think, as a generalisation, we have grossly overcomplicated healthcare delivery. And I think that goes right across health and social care. And so in terms of asking people to jump through hoops because we have a process and leaving a voluntary or community voluntary group, believing the process is actually more important than meeting their needs, is something that we need to be aware of, and being aware of it we need to address, because even if it's a perception, it is a debilitating or potentially debilitating perception. In the time remaining, I want to address another aspect of this issue, because in addition to inheriting a grant scheme that is extremely challenging in terms of the finances, I've also inherited a scheme which I consider to be inherently unfair. The scheme has been mostly closed for the best part of 2 decades, with no route for an unfunded organisation to access financial support. Through no fault of their own, the same organisations, around 60 of them, as I said, have been receiving core grant funding in all of that time. Now, I know attempts have been made to redesign the scheme. That was between 2015 and 2017, and again as recently as 2022. But we kept coming back to the old closed scheme. And the latest attempt in 22 failed because of design flaws, which my department now accepts were its responsibility. So don't get me wrong, the organisations currently supported under the current scheme work with and alongside some of the most vulnerable children and adults in Northern Ireland. To offer a few examples, current recipients provide treatment and support services to people with drug and alcohol addictions, children who are in the care system, older people, victims of domestic and sexual abuse, adults and children with disabilities, and those living with life-limiting and life-threatening condition. But the scheme needs to change. In 2010, both NICFA and CO3 indicated it was no longer fit for purpose. Also, the Department of Health is operating in a much different policy and strategy environment, and the sector itself has evolved and continues to evolve. So, to signal my commitment, I have asked NICFA to facilitate a co-design process through which my officials are working with representatives from the sector to redesign the core grant scheme, and hopefully that will be for implementation at the beginning of the next financial year. Again, I must add, budget permitting. I'm running out of time, Deputy Speaker, so I just want to say I have had a brief on how discussions are going between the Department, NICFA, and NICFA's member organisations. And without going into fine detail, what I would say, Deputy Speaker, is that some of the discussions and conclusions have been very surprising. Some of the groups are proposing a way forward which would not have been our first guess, if I may put it that way, and I think that affirms the value of undertaking this review of the core grant scheme to try and do something better, but also importantly to me, to make sure that it is opened up, because over the last 20 years, obviously the landscape of community and voluntary sector groups has changed in some ways rather significantly, and it's not fair that some groups have access and others do not. And I look forward to the fruits of that consultation and the advice that NICFA finally bring to me.
Thank you, Minister, for that response. I now call Steve Aiken to wind on the amendment. Mr. Aiken, you've got up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much indeed, and I thank all the members for mostly the good-natured tone of this debate as we've gone through today. I think, and as the Minister said it very clearly, the main issue we have to deal with here is the irony klaxon. The Minister and the Department of Health made these decisions only in the worst possible cases. The cut was made not by the Minister, but indeed by the Permanent Secretary when this Assembly was not sitting. Let's just focus in on that for a second. Here we are as an Assembly debating. Nobody here thinks that the community and voluntary sector do not do a good job. Nobody here thinks that the community and voluntary sector do not add significantly to what we're doing for health outcomes across Northern Ireland. They're a vital part of what we're trying to achieve. Nobody here, I do not believe, does not consider the fact that we need to look at other members of the voluntary and community sectors and not just look at the ones who have previously been in that sector. We need to look at what is the best value and the best approach for us to be able to do this. But we can't do that without the necessary funding. And that's why our amendment was made, because this issue is about funding. And our party took the decision not to support the budget because the funding is not there for health. And some of the members who spoke today, and indeed some spoke eloquently, some did not, but some who spoke eloquently talked about, in the overall size and the context of the health budget, the small amounts of money that should be available to be able to do that. But other members will be aware we have a similar sort of situation in policing, we have a similar sort of situation in infrastructure, we have a similar sort of situation in education. Every single penny has to be scrutinised and looked at effectively if we are going to do that. Finding extra funds is not just a matter of sort of pulling them out from wherever they are. And that is why our amendment is there, because we are calling on the Finance Minister to make sure with additional funds that come through that they do indeed come to health. Certainly.
Thank you, Member, for giving way. I don't know if the member's been in the chamber when the Education Minister has been on multiple occasions when he's been challenged on the transformation needed for special education needs. And every response he gives, give me the money and I'll make the changes. Does it not seem hypocritical that the DUP seem to be talking out of one side of their mouth in one way when it comes to education and another when they're coming to talk about health?
And I thank the member for his intervention, because I think it's not just a question, and much as I would feel quite happy to talk about the Education Minister and some of the other issues from the DUP, but also we've had similar sort of issues with the justice, we've had similar issues with infrastructure, with similar sort of issues with economy, and we go on and we go on. The reality is that the funding isn't there, and unless funding is put there correctly and is appropriated towards health, as many of us sat round that table in Hillsborough Castle less than a year ago, and we all sat there, and every single party who are now in this executive agreed that health was the #1 priority. Certainly.
Giving way, does he agree with me as a fellow member of the Finance Committee over some years that one of the things we were expecting was a budget sustainability plan, which I believe was due to be published by today? We don't have that, and that would be helpful, because that would obviously allow other executive ministers to understand on what basis the Finance Minister was making her plans.
And I fully agree, and indeed, it's a pity that other members of the Finance Committee, we do indeed have the Deputy Chair of the Finance Committee here. Again, where is the sustainability plan? It was supposed to be by the end of the month. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I believe the end of the month finishes at 23:59 tonight, and we haven't seen a sustainability plan, so I'm not quite sure where that's going. And I welcome, I welcome the comments, but I think the most important thing we need to appreciate, and this is why I would encourage all members to support the amendment as we go forward, is that finance has to be found. Finance has to be found for our #1 priority, which we've all agreed was in health, and I do not believe anybody disagrees that the fact that the community and voluntary sector need more resources, but we can only allocate that when we have got that. And unless we're giving an adequate funding mechanism and support, we're not going to be able to do that. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, thank you very much indeed, and I ask all members to support our amendment. Thank you.
Patsy McGlone will wind up and conclude the debate on the motion. Mr. McGlone, you have up to 10 minutes.
I got a last John Corley. As I listen to the debate here today, I'm kind of reminded of some of those meetings that many of us attend where somebody says, usually from the back of the room, but they say somebody would need to do something about that. And you know what that means? That means somebody, but not them. And listening to the debate here today, I've heard everybody laud and praise the community and voluntary sector. Everyone has said the valuable role that they've played. Everyone has said how important they are to dealing with people's mental health and being there as a support, which of course they are. The level of priority given in the programme for government, the level of commitment to mental health and funding for the community and voluntary sector in that programme for government would tend to tell me that it was somebody had better do something about that. So, just moving my way through the comments that have been made, of course, my colleague Mark Durkin in proposing referred to the importance of that core grant. There were numerous references throughout to the legacy that we've been left by the conflict, the troubles in our society, and that people are still living with PTSD. Many other services are required, therefore, out in the community. We had a debate earlier about suicide prevention and what can be done on that. There are so many core services that the Minister indeed mentioned, for elderly people, for isolation. The list is endless of services, and that gap has been filled in many, many instances by the community and voluntary services. Schemes have been discontinued. That has been referred to. Obviously, there's an importance there for those schemes to be reinstated. Multiple references were made to the year-on-year funding, where no certainty is there, and where people, the Minister referred to it, where people aren't secure in their own employment, and the vital services that they have provided. Well, you have people leaving jobs to move on to other jobs, and many, many instances it has been referred to move into the statutory sector. Robbie Butler, referring to the financial pressures and budgets, again made reference to the community and voluntary sector. Liz Kimmins referred to her constituency and South Down and the voluntary sector and its important role with the most vulnerable in society. Diane Forsyth again referred to the issues with the department and was somewhat critical of the Minister and the department, rebutted very well, I would say, by the Minister later on. The information that you referred to, and perhaps that would be useful indeed in making the case of those many referrals made by the sector that information wasn't available. I would suggest that might be useful, indeed helpful, to the department seeking funding during its quest for reinstatement of the core funding. Danny Donnelly again referred to the importance of the legacy of the Troubles, suicide rates, the 50% cut in funding, that gap which had been left by the absence of political leadership and the need for institutional reform. Alan Robinson again referred to and commended the work of the community and voluntary sector about the lifeline that they provide in many of our communities, indeed in those rural communities. The isolation, the financial stress, we're all well aware of those problems that face our offices, indeed the people, and the inordinate pressures that people live under. And Noel McAllister, support for the sector, the 50% cut, 1.8 million isn't a lot for asking. And again, I would say, as a member of the opposition, 1.8 million, if it's not a lot for asking, I would have suggested that back to somebody would need to do something about that, and I suggest that be referred back to your executive colleagues in the need for someone to do something about that. Yep, sure.
Given that it's obvious from the debate that a number of the executive political parties are on different pages in this, does it not underscore the benefit of having some sort of plan that they could all get together, like a programme for government, which all four parties just voted against, including in the last motion, and at least that would give the clarity and hopefully the funding that would be needed for the various sectors?
Indeed, and especially if the 1.8 million isn't a lot, one would presume that a programme for government by the executive party could come up with that, given the invaluable pressures, the needs, the requirements in society, and how important that community and voluntary sector is in the community. Again, back to the executive. Over to the Minister. The Minister referred to the decision to cut grant and was very specific that was by the Permanent Secretary at that time because of the DUP hadn't been participating in devolution, and also the loss of the European Social Fund. Now, Minister, I'm happily give way if you can provide us with some further information as to the quantity of European Social Fund that was lost through that perturbed period of time and stupid vote. If you have that detail.
I do not have that detail to hand, Deputy Speaker, but what is very clear is that any promises the UK government made that they would make up that shortfall, those promises were not delivered upon to any significant degree, and the voluntary and community sector suffers as a consequence.
Indeed, and perhaps the Prime Minister at that time, who's on a very lucrative speaking engagement, could make up the shortfall out of his own pocket. I say that just tongue-in-cheek, I would add. You referred to your role as Commissioner. You saw the issues firsthand, Minister. The core grant scheme recognised the valuable role it, the choices of the statutory services and the funding of the community and voluntary sector a very difficult place to be in. Now, one issue I'd just highlight to you, Minister, you referred there that the potential did exist with a transition from care in hospitals to care in the communities. I would have to say my experience of that is you have a long, hard road ahead of you there. I simply represent an area, a rural area, where domiciliary care workers and that care in the community is unavailable until some poor creature dies and a slot becomes available for the next person on that list. So it's maybe not one to hang your hat on. That's all I'll say to you, Minister. So back to that 1.8 million. And incidentally, we're supporting the amendment. That 1.8 million, hopefully a case can be made, given the consensus that is in the room here today, a case can be made to the Minister of Finance by all the parties represented here in the Executive to come up with that 1.8 million. And, yep.
For his point, and it is right to get down into the weeds of the technicalities, but I believe that the Department of Health is still facing pressures in the region of around £200 million. So whilst £1.8 million doesn't sound a lot, if you're already £200 million in the red, it doesn't matter if you're looking for another pound or 1.8 million or 18 million, you need more money.
Take the point. All I was referring to was specifically the motion that's on the debate here today. Indeed, I hear the point. So back to the Minister referred to the care system, older people, some with life-threatening diseases or life-threatening conditions, and the need for those people to get the care which is a requirement. Now, we're debating here today, we're debating the loss of the community and voluntary sector, and really I've no problem supporting your amendment and making that case, because to emphasise the really, really important thing that people all know in this chamber, the really vital role that community and voluntary sector provides to people. It is actually life-saving. And on that note, I ask that members, we will support your amendment, and I ask that members support our motion, please.
Thank you. Members, the question is that the amendment standing in the name of Alan Chambers, Colin Crawford, John Stewart and Robbie Butler be made. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Members, the question is that the motion as amended be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Members, take your ease for a moment or two for a change at the table.
Members, just take your ease a moment while we track down the Minister. Okay. Members, please take your seats. Okay. The next item of business is a motion from the opposition on cross-departmental cooperation on children's mental health. Clerk, could you please read the motion?
That this Assembly recognises that the challenges of mental health are not confined to a single department, but impacts all aspects of government policy. Regrets that a lack of cross-departmental cooperation, exacerbated by long periods without an executive, has contributed to a breakdown in children's services, severely impacting the mental health of many children and young people, and calls on the Minister of Finance to use the powers of the Child Service Cooperation Act Northern Ireland 2015 to instigate an effective model of cross-departmental cooperation on children's services by enabling pooled funding, sharing of resources and joint accountability mechanisms to deliver effective cross-departmental action on children's mental health.
Okay. I call on Justin McNulty to move the motion.
Moved.
Thank you. The Business Committee has agreed to allow 1 hour for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have 5 minutes to propose and 5 minutes to wind. All other speakers will have 3 minutes. Justin, please open the debate on the motion.
At the outset, I think it's important to establish a critical fact. The north of Ireland is in the grips of a mental health crisis. Mental illness is indiscriminate and it's influenced by so many factors, from access to housing, high levels of poverty and inequality, log jams in our education system, the trauma of our history and challenges of our environment. People are struggling on so many fronts from every walk of life, and sadly that includes children and young people. The immense challenges in dealing with our mental health crisis are well documented. The cross-cutting and indiscriminate nature of mental ill health are well known. What we need in response to this crisis is a collaborative and joined-up focus on health and well-being rather than siloed solutions that tackle the symptoms but ignore the cause. And in terms of tackling the cause, nowhere is this more pressing than supporting the well-being of our children and young people in their formative years. So many departments have a key role to play in upholding the mental health of our children and young people, most obviously health and education, who are on the front lines of this issue. But it is equally important that the Departments of Communities, Infrastructure, Finance, Economy and Justice are engaged in finding solutions to the underlying problems contributing to the mental health, ill health of amongst our young people. Tragically, meaningful action on improving the mental well-being of our young people is being blocked by dysfunctional executive who would rather engage in sham fights and petty posturing than working together to address shared problems. We have the tools to support a collaborative approach to the delivery of children's services, having previously passed ambitious legislation that placed a duty to cooperate in the delivery of children's services. But rather than use this legislation to its full potential, there has been little more than lip service and lacklustre implementation. It is true that departments are impeded by financial constraints, but that does not explain why we aren't using existing powers to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of services and to improve outcomes. The programme for government states, "We know that fiscal and service sustainability will require brave decisions, collaborative working and a relentless focus on innovation and efficiency in service delivery. This can only be achieved through partnership working and a willingness to accept change, challenge the status quo and make long-term strategic decisions." We are not seeing much evidence of bravery, collaboration or focus on innovation and efficiency. Frighteningly, there is no mention of children's mental health in the programme for government. I say that again. There is no mention of children and young people's mental health in the programme for government. Stakeholders working on the front line say that cooperation in the delivery of services for children remains the exception rather than the rule, and that there is a minimal and piecemeal approach to the pooling of resources. The SDLP motion today simply asks the Minister for Finance to use the powers of the Child Services Cooperation Act to set up the appropriate mechanisms to make cooperation and collaboration across departments easier and more effective to deliver effective action on children's mental health. We are asking for public money to be used more effectively in pursuit of better outcomes. This simple step could make a significant contribution to improving the delivery of special educational needs provision, supporting a government-wide approach to eliminating child poverty and a better functioning system in children's social care. I fully anticipate financial constraints being invoked as a reason for the executive shortcoming. All of us know that we need more money. That is no secret. But it's equally true that we already have powers at our disposal to tackle these issues head on, and we must use those powers to make things work for the better here and now. Nothing could be more important than safeguarding our children and young people, and the executive must act accordingly. Financial constraints are not an excuse, and failure can no longer continue to be the default outcome for this executive. Children and young people deserve better. Children and young people need executive parties in government to do better.
Thank you, Justin. And I call on Linda Dillon.
Thank you, and thank you to the proposers of this motion today. I think we can all agree that the mental health of our children and young people is an issue that many of us, if not all, I'm fairly certain all of us, are deeply concerned about. The challenges faced by children in the north regarding mental health are not isolated to one department. I think that is very clear. They cut across every aspect of government policy, and this motion recognised that. And in addressing the mental health crisis among our young people, it requires more than just words. It requires coordinated cross-departmental action. Mental health is not an issue that begins and ends with the Department of Health. It intersects with education, housing, justice and communities. It impacts children in their schools, in their homes and their communities. And without proper cross-departmental cooperation, our approach to children's mental health becomes fragmented, ineffective and ultimately fails to meet the needs of those who are most vulnerable. Departments working in silos create gaps in care and coordination that directly impact children's mental health. A joined-up approach is not a nice-to-have, it is a necessity. And we need departments to pool their resources, share funding and hold joint accountability for delivering children's services. We need to ensure that children's mental health is given the priority that it deserves. And I think we can do that, whether it's in programme for government or not. I think we have agreement across this chamber today that it is a priority. I don't think that we can ignore that. And we can't afford to waste any more time working in isolation. It's a collective responsibility, and all arms of government must be engaged in delivering solutions. And whilst we emphasise the need for cross-departmental cooperation, we do need someone to take the lead on it. And we must acknowledge that the Department of Health has a central role in addressing the crisis. The Ray Jones report has provided a comprehensive review of children's services, and it highlights serious deficiencies in how vulnerable children are supported. This report is not something that can be ignored. It outlines the failings and offers key recommendations, and we need to see a plan taken forward in order to implement the recommendations. We must look to the Minister of Health to take the lead on that. He cannot do it alone, but we do need someone to take the lead and show leadership on this issue. And we need to hear from him exactly, particularly in the committee and as we have outlined, and I think some of the members spoke last week as well in relation to children's services and children's mental health, that we need to see the implementation of Ray Jones' recommendations. So I think that now is the time for concrete action. Children and young people of the North
the member draw
deserve
remarks
better,
to a close?
and they deserve to know what their government will do for their well-being. So I think collectively we need to move forward, not just those in the executive. Every single one of us in this House has a responsibility.
Thank you, Linda. And I can ask members to keep their remarks to 3 minutes, please. Can I call Diane Forsyth next, please?
Deputy Speaker, and I thank the opposition for highlighting the issue of children's mental health in their motion today. Sitting with a family in tears over the lack of services available for their child facing mental health crisis is sadly not unusual, and there can be no doubt that children's social services in Northern Ireland are facing unprecedented pressures, and this has a residual impact on the mental health of those children in care or who are regarded as being in need. And the impact of the pandemic cannot be overstated in this regard. The number of children in care at the end of October 2023 was 17% higher than in the last official figure prior to COVID. The breakdown of children's services has also massively impacted the mental health and well-being of many parents and carers. Unacceptable wait times for assessment, barriers to accessing services, and in particular a lack of respite services have placed huge strains on many families. We want to see the Health Minister urgently setting out his stall in response to the wide-ranging recommendations around structures, staffing and the oversight of children's services, including the independent review report published last year. Departments, of course, should work together, and I recognise the Children's Cooperation Act and the lack of uptake of it in practice. However, I agree with the previous speaker that it's the Health Minister who should be taking the lead in terms of the cooperation for other departments. We need to see a removal of silo working mentality between departments, between health trusts and between local health services. Within this work, the Health Minister may access and apply, of course, the Children's Services Cooperation Act in doing so. We fully support the aim of investigating an effective model of cross-departmental cooperation on children's services, and it's great to see the Finance Minister here today, and I look forward to hearing her assessment of the lack of uptake of the use of the Children's Services Cooperation Act. But I think as we move forward, the key priority here is addressing the issue of children's mental health, and it's for the Health Minister to take urgent steps to lead this forward to address the crisis of the very real devastation that many families here find themselves in.
Thank you, Diana. And I call on Nuala McAllister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Opposition for bringing this motion today, and I welcome the opportunity to speak on it. Children's services is an issue of priority to me as a member of the Health Committee, and I, along with my Alliance colleagues, have pushed since joining the committee that it is a priority for the entirety of the committee, and I am delighted that the entire committee is on board and that is the case. And of course, children's mental health is a priority within that. I do welcome particular issues within the motion, in particular what it speaks around using the powers of the Children's Services Cooperation Act, because we have looked in detail at this so far within the committee, in particular when it relates to the implementation of the Ray Jones review. But there are various other issues to highlight today, and in particular I want to speak a bit about my role and the role of the APG on mental health regarding the inquiry into early education and mental health. It was quite a lengthy inquiry that took place in the absence of an assembly, so it was quite important that organisations had their opportunity to have their voices heard in the absence of committees to be able to give evidence. We heard from right across different sectors. We heard from teachers themselves, teaching unions, the teaching colleges, teachers and of course community and voluntary sector. But we also heard from best practice across the UK, both in Scotland and Wales, and I do believe that there was learning that we could take from that. I recognise that the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Health in particular will lean on the issues of finance, but there are a lot of policy recommendations which can be implemented when it comes to children's mental health. And I do also want to touch on the aspect that is the CAMS waiting list, the disaster that it is, and not because of one individual in particular, but we all have people who come to our constituency offices every single week who need help, they need access and referral to services. But I don't know about the rest of the MLAs in the Chamber, but we do not refer them to CAMS. We don't refer them to that service because we know that they simply would not be able to get it, and instead we rely on the community and voluntary sector to offer that for children and young people. And one of those in particular within my constituency relate to PIPS and Lighthouse in particular, who are doing amazing work in North Belfast with the schools to ensure that we can tackle, particularly with young men, that aspect of mental health, and PIPS who have talked us through their services and highlighted how they work with children as young as 4 when it comes to mental health crisis, and that's a really sad indictment of us as a society. But when it comes to the overall aspect of children's services, it is up to the Health Minister to take the lead on that aspect, and we want to hear from him, and perhaps the Finance Minister, when looking at this motion and taking it back into the Executive, can actually ask the Health Minister, as we have done within the committee, what he is actually going to do about the implementation of Ray Jones. Is he going to support the recommendation of that arm's length body, a Minister for Children, that would encompass all of this work and actually bring all departments together, not just through the use of the Children's Services Cooperation Act? Thank you.
Thank you, Nuala. I call on Colin Crawford.
Much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and every opportunity to talk about mental health is a welcome one, and that's especially the case today when we're considering the importance of good mental health among our children and young people. Mental health and well-being more generally is much better recognised today and understood than it was just only a few years ago. Whilst, like so many aspects of care, Mr Deputy Speaker, mental health and its impacts weighs heavily across many departments, and that is why cross-departmental work and is referenced in this motion is so important. Poor mental health can grip lives, test even the strongest of family relationships, destabilise and disrupt a young person's education, as well as being a major strain on our economic firepower. Indeed, on the latter point, this estimated cost of mental health in Northern Ireland is £3.4 billion. Mental health impacts young and old and everyone in between. It reaches across the full lifespan, but like so many other issues, the earlier problems are identified, or even better avoided, the better the outcomes are for everyone. There's a mountain of evidence, Mr Deputy Speaker, that supports consideration of early intervention and preventative measures. And that is why I very much welcome when we read the 10-year mental health strategy. There's a clear theme focusing on promoting children and their families' positive mental health. And whilst I'm sure we'd all like to see the strategy receiving the funding it deserves, as well as the funding that was pledged by all political parties, it's important that we make sure we use every single penny in the very best possible way. Nevertheless, the strategy is quite explicit in including outcomes such as better resilience among children and young people to help people cope with mental wellness and therefore prevent mental ill health, and likewise an outcome for all children and young people to receive the care and treatment they need when they need it. Mr Deputy Speaker, another very important outcome in the context of children's mental health is the commitment to deliver longer-term improvement in CAMHS. Thankfully, there has been some good progress made through the allocation of additional funding to assist with increasing capacity and enhancing current provision. And of course, as far as the Ulster Unionist Party is concerned, we are fully supportive of the necessity to increase CAMHS funding to 10% of the adult mental health funding. But as I said at the very start of my remarks, there has been huge progress made in recent years, and those discussions are much more common than they were previously. But of course, there's much more to be done. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much indeed, Colin. I call on Diane Dodds.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I do welcome the Opposition's focus on mental health today. I think it has been very useful, and I think the tone of it has been right, and I hope that some of those involved in this sphere will take heart from the fact that we have spent the day talking about this particular really important issue. The motion before us refers to mental health, and children's mental health and young people's mental health. And I'll quote the statistic that I quoted this morning, that in the Northern Ireland Life and Times Survey 2023, only 50%, only half of those aged 18 to 24 who were surveyed reported positively about their mental health. That is a very, very sad statistic about young people in Northern Ireland. And many of those young people are found to have profound levels of anxiety, and that is a very difficult issue as well. We focus here on the Children's Cooperation Act. And since I've come to this assembly, I've heard about collaboration, no working in silos, over and over and over again. And folks, the honest answer is that people out there don't really care about any of this. They want action and their problems solved. And that is the most important thing that we can focus on today. We should be looking at cooperation between education, economy, health and communities to resolve that issue of a legal entitlement to education for young people with special needs up to the age of 25, to bring us in line to the rest of the United Kingdom. We should be working with the voluntary and community sector to ensure that there are pathways for those young people. But in my closing remarks, I want to focus on arm's-length bodies and trusts, because they cannot be absolved from this as well. And we all watched the programme last week where mothers shared the really difficult journeys they had with young people in their own homes and the lack of respite services. And lo and behold, in my office on Friday, we had another mother sitting in front of me to say, I moved 5 minutes down the road out of my health care trust into another healthcare trust that had no services, and the first thing that happened was that my other trust pulled the respite services immediately. We have families at breaking point in Northern Ireland, and it is just not good enough for trusts to offer such a very wide and unequal variety of services for our children and young people. And I would like to see the focus put on the trusts as well as departments. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Diane. Can I call on Shannon Holland, please?
Deputy Speaker, and again thank you to the proposers. I welcome the opportunity to speak on this. For me, this is unsurprising that when we talk about mental health, we also have to talk about poverty. It plays a significant role in exacerbating the mental health challenges that we have discussed today, with around 1 in 4 children in Northern Ireland living in poverty, and those children far more likely to experience anxiety, depression and other mental health issues. A recent survey found that children from low-income families are nearly twice as likely to suffer from those conditions than their more affluent peers, and yet many of the families in those situations find mental health services completely inaccessible, whether that's because of the physical transportation barriers being an issue. But another key point is that lack of ability to pay for further services once the initial health service provision period has ended, and that unfortunately usually coincides with the young patient only starting to get to the crux of the issues that are faced. So we need to address the root causes of poverty as well, which falls on other departments. And I think it was Miss Lynn from the member for West Belfast had mentioned earlier on about the different departments all having a part to play on this, that it isn't just one singular department. And now I want to focus on something I've been really passionate about raising since I became an MLA, and that is that Children's Services Corporation Act. It really does have the power to enable those public authorities to share resources, to pool their funds and to collaborate across their silos. But I think that we have failed thus far to leverage the legislative framework to the fullest of its potential. It's nearly a decade since the Act's passage, and I think our services have remained fragmented, with many departments not taking full advantage of the provisions of that Act. The recent report from the Department of Education on the CSCA was delayed by 2 years because of governmental disjointedness and there not being a government here. That underscores the consequences of the failure. And while there are occasional instances of great cooperation, like the Thrive project that's coordinated by Bernardo's, they're just far too rare, and the reality is the departments are not adequately aligning their resources or efforts. Both Nikki and the Children's Law Centre have repeatedly voiced their concerns about a lack of meaningful progress in implementing CSCA, and personally I think we need a rights-based approach with the full incorporation of the United Nations Conventions of the Rights of the Child into all areas of domestic law, something Alliance has been calling for on multiple occasions. With those standards in place, young people will be more than just subjects. They will become co-designers of their communities and their services. Never has the phrase "nothing about us without us" been more pertinent than when we are discussing the services of young people. So the time for action is now, and I agree with the call on the Finance Minister to introduce the necessary regulations under CSCA. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. And I now call on Paul Frew.
And it never fails to amaze me, Deputy Speaker, the zombie-like collective memory loss of the part the parties here played in the escalation of our mental health crisis with the deployment of fear and the lockdown philosophy. It amazes me that it hasn't been raised today in any of the debates, And to prove my point, Mr Deputy Speaker, I will place on record the statistics of child attendance at school. Children missing 10% or more in school in the year 17 and 18 sat at 16.9%. In 18-19, that sat at 15.8%. But in 21-22, the children who missed over 10% of school sat at 35%. 35%. The children who missed 20% or more of school in 17-18, it sat at 4%. 18-19, it sat at 4%. In 21-22, it sat at 10.7%. And in 22-23, it sat at 8.7% of children absent from school more than 20%. But if you drill down into these figures, it gets even worse, Mr Deputy Speaker. Pupils not attending school for over 50% of time in 21-22 sat at 4,145 children. 1,280 of those children missing over 80% of school. But in 17-18, these figures were 1,731 children missing 50% of school, and only 523 children missing 80% of school. The deployment of fear and lockdown philosophy doubled every one of those measures, every one of those statistics. But these are children. And I would like to know how we are going to fix the mistakes of the Department of Health and the zombie assembly. Because unless you know the root cause of the problems, we ain't going to solve anything. And that will start by each member here looking in the mirror at the part that they played with regards to the deployment of fear that scared our children. And I'm not saying that these stats are all down to mental health, but you can see the clear correlation.
Could the member draw his remarks to a close?
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Paul. Members, just before I call the Minister, I'm very conscious of the fact that many members had more to say and more to speak. I would encourage members to go to their parties and go to the Business Committee and look at sort of the timings for this debate. But that is the timings were given by the Business Committee. I understand that many members wish to say more, but my hands are constrained. Minister, over to you, and you've got 10 minutes.
And I welcome the opportunity to speak on this important topic as well. The mental health and well-being of children and young people in society should be a priority for us all, and I'm sure this is an issue, as has already been reflected, that we all deal with in our constituency office on too regular a basis. Statistics show that the rates of anxiety and depression are higher in the child and youth population here compared with that of England, Scotland or Wales, a similar trend to that seen in the adult population. That highlights the scale of the challenge that exists. The establishment of a mental health champion in Professor Siobhan O'Neill demonstrates the clear commitment across the Executive to joint working to improve the mental health and well-being of all our citizens. The aim of the Office of the Mental Health Champion is to advise and assist in the promotion of mental health and well-being through all policies and services here. The Children's Service Cooperation Act aims to improve cooperation amongst departments and agencies. It places a duty on children's authorities to cooperate where appropriate and pool resources should they choose as they deliver services aimed at improving the well-being of children and young people. The Act enables my department to make regulations about procedures to be followed in sharing resources or pooling funds. Cooperation between departments already takes place, and existing mechanisms allow for the pooling of funding and sharing of resources. There is guidance available from a number of sources about how the pooling and sharing of resources can be actioned. For example, departments can submit joint bids within budget or in-year monitoring rounds. The recent call for bids to the Transformation Fund also encouraged joint bids across departments. One good and recent example of how cooperation has been taken forward and implemented in this area is the work done at pace to develop proposals around interim support measures for early learning and childcare. The Executive agreed to earmark £25 million for this in 2024-25, which was held centrally until measures were brought forward. Those measures were developed with the support of a cross-departmental task and finish group, ensuring that proposals captured a work across relevant departments and avoiding duplication with existing support measures. Whilst the Department of Education is the lead on the work stream, it is coordinating implementation of the measures and transferring funding as appropriate to other delivery organisations. Technical transfers are also possible between departments to facilitate the pooling of resources. So there is guidance available and the means to cooperate across departments. The process for setting the 25-26 budget is underway, and I will encourage departments to look for opportunities to work together and to submit or to bring forward joint working. Ministers, of course, can work together to deliver effectively or on a cross-departmental basis, and that must be encouraged. I am keen to do everything possible to encourage collaboration across the public sector and beyond. I appreciate that the pooling of resources and sharing of resources where appropriate across departments can support more efficient and effective service delivery, and I think that's something that we all aspire to. Earlier this month, I hosted a roundtable event with representatives of the children's sector and organisations with a more general interest in executive actions for children and young people. A number of those present highlighted the Act and called for more collaboration between departments. I will continue to engage with representatives from this sector to understand the issues and requirements. It is my view that the pooling and sharing of resources is best addressed on a case-by-case basis, as this approach ensures maximum flexibility to deliver services in the most efficient and effective way, rather than constraining the options available to departments or the executive as a whole. There would be some concerns that putting regulations in place could have adverse impacts in limiting cooperation that can take place rather than allowing initiatives to develop organically. And I believe genuinely there is a desire amongst ministers to work together to deliver for people, not just because of our limited resources, but more importantly to deliver better outcomes. I, however, am always happy to look at the need for further guidance if it can be shown to be making a meaningful difference. My department is represented on the Children and Young People Strategy, Monitoring and Reporting Board, and that is a useful forum for discussing these issues.
Thank you, Minister. And I call on the Leader of the Opposition to wind, and Matthew, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all thank those who have spoken in this debate and those who have spoken on all the motions today. 2 of our motions have passed thus far, amended, albeit one amendment that we agreed with and an amendment we weren't so keen on. But I would thank members of all parties for the constructive way they've approached this debate. We've said consistently in opposition that we intend to be constructive and will be robust too. Sometimes that means we are very robust, much to the displeasure of some of the executive parties, but it also means that we use the time we have here to have constructive debates on the floor of this Assembly, and I think we largely have had constructive debates today. In relation to the final motion, I just want to touch on a few of the remarks. I won't exhaustively go through everything that was said, but I only have 5 minutes. There is only a limited amount that any government or set of elected politicians can do to effect change in something as subtle and variable as the mental health of our citizens. But in a situation where it is widely accepted that we have a serious and deepening mental health crisis that is particularly acute among our young people, it is incumbent on all of us to use every power that we have to do something about that. Diane Dodds strikingly and powerfully referred to the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey, which talks about the fact that 18% of 16-year-olds suffer from chronic physical or mental health challenges. We are all, whether we are parents or not, aware of the immense burden that our young people face and the serious mental health challenges we have, and also, as multiple speakers have referenced, the severe challenges the child and adolescent mental health services CAMHS faces, and the lack of resources that it has and the lack of ability to deliver. Multiple organisations, whether they're involved in providing children's services or involved in the mental health sector, i.e. the organisations that were represented in the Long Gallery today, have made clear that the Act that we refer to in this motion, the 2015 Children's Services Cooperation Act, has not been used to its full potential. Multiple speakers, Ms Forsyth and indeed someone else, I think someone from Sinn Féin mentioned, but I'm not sure, said that it would have been perhaps more apt to make a more specific call on the Health Minister. Of course, we did bring the Health Minister twice to the Chamber today to account for what his department is doing. It's also clear that Section 8 of the legislation in question places a specific, places a specific burden on the Department of Finance, and I'm glad that the Minister has come here today and engaged in that. Happy to give way.
We should bring this to the Minister of Health. It was simply to say that we needed somebody to take the lead, but I agree all departments should work together.
And you've an extra minute, Matthew.
Thank you very much, and I thank you very much for the extra minute to Ms Dillon. It is important that we work together. Even those of us who are in opposition have an important job to do when it comes to delivering something like this. Our job is accountability, but it's also pushing policy and pushing the discussion in the right direction, and that's what this afternoon is all about. Ms Dodds, and it's not very often that Ms Dodds and I are in agreement on many things, but on a couple of occasions during her speech today I found myself in thundering agreement with her. She also said that the public out there genuinely don't care in many cases who delivers what service for them, and that could not be more true. Most people don't know how many departments there are in Northern Ireland. They don't know, if we're honest, what's devolved, what's not devolved, where there's cross-border responsibility, where the council does something. They only care about the services they and their family receive, and that's why we should all be about better working. That's why this motion is very robust and specific in calling on the Minister of Finance to use her powers in this regard. That does not absolve any other minister, specifically the Minister of Health or even the Minister of Education, with whom the statutory responsibility to deliver the children's and young persons strategy under this legislation lies. So it is important that there is jointry. I would say, without wishing to score points, that on occasion during this debate what we heard two things. One, a broad-based commitment and seriousness about that issue, and that I do welcome. But secondly, a slight tendency to say, as my colleague Patsy McGlone said in the previous debate, this is terrible, something must be done, is someone going to do something about it, and to slightly shift responsibility from one minister to another. I have to say I didn't hear that from the Minister of Finance, so I would commend her on that. I'm often challenging a Finance Minister, but on this occasion she was clear about where her responsibilities lay. It is important that we use whatever powers we have. It is nearly a decade now since this specific piece of legislation was passed. It also created an obligation for the department or for the executive to formulate its programme for government on the basis of on the basis of the provisions of this Act and indeed the reporting mechanisms in it. I haven't seen any clear evidence as of yet that we will be asking questions as to whether the current or just published draft programme for government specifically has drawn on what's in that Act. But it's a resource there. It's something that this Assembly has already passed a decade ago. Some of us were here then, I wasn't, but some of us were here then. The clear intention was that we start to break down the tradition and the pernicious culture of siloed working. I'm afraid we have, on occasion, since we've returned, still seen too much siloed working, still seen too much of a tendency to say, that's your minister, that's our minister. Part of our job in opposition, and I know we occasionally or regularly or constantly irritate people, but we're going to keep doing it, is to say, this is about outcomes for our citizens. This isn't about whose minister does this, or whose minister wants more budget, or whose minister's hasn't seen what paper. It's about the outcome we deliver for our citizens, and that's fundamentally what this motion is about. It is extremely challenging in a world of technological advance, social media pressures, climate change and a whole range of other things for people in a devolved legislature to transform the challenges facing our young people. But we can use every single lever, legislative, regulatory, financial, we have. So I would encourage members to support this motion and thank you very much to everybody who has participated in today's Opposition Day constructively.
Thank you. The question is that the motion standing on the order paper be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Any contraries? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, item 5 on the order paper, the adjournment. The question is that the Assembly do now adjourn. The Assembly is adjourned. Thank you.
Assembly Chamber. Sound. Assembly Chamber. Sound. Assembly chamber. Sound. Assembly chamber. Sound.